All
here.
right.
Yep, I appreciate it.
Mhm. presentation.
How you doing? Thank you for coming out. I like seeing familiar faces.
All right, everyone. Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Welcome, welcome. It's showtime. Well, welcome everyone to FAU Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute. Whenever we start a public program, I always like to ask, how many of you have been here before? Raise your hand. Wonderful. Okay, that's a lot of you. Great. How many are first-time visitors? Okay, great. Well, welcome back to those of you who have been here, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. A little bit of introduction. Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute is the northernmost campus of Florida Atlantic University. We've been doing amazing marine science and education for over 50 years, and we are part of Florida Atlantic University. Like I said, we have over 300 scientists, staff, students, educators, all working toward a goal of ocean science for a better world. And I am very lucky. I am the Director of Outreach and Engagement here, and my job is to share all of the cool stuff that we do with our community. And we're doing a lot of great work with aquaculture, and that is the purpose that we're all here for today. So, did this flip out? Okay. So we've been doing aquaculture research for decades. We grow a variety of plants and animals, either for food or for restoration. And we take a lot of that technology and we transfer it to the private sector. So education is a really big part of that work. About a year and a half ago, I partnered with some of our aquaculture researchers to put in a grant to host a public aquaculture workshop series. And we wanted to address some of the common questions that we get, where seafood comes from, the role of aquaculture here in Florida. And I'm standing here today because that grant was awarded. It came from the Florida Aquaculture Specialty License Plate, which is administered by our Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute Foundation. So if any of you have ever seen those, there are lots of different specialty plates that you can get in Florida. This one has a clownfish on it and says Florida Aquaculture. And proceeds from those plate sales go back to support research and education projects. So if you're interested in supporting initiatives like these, you can buy one for your car. So we were awarded this grant. And this is the first of a 4-part series. We'll be hosting them once a month on the second Saturday, and each workshop will have a different topic. So today is an introduction. Next month we'll be focusing all on finfish. The following month will be on shellfish, and the last month will be restoration and aquariums. So we're going to cover a lot of different aspects of aquaculture and seafood so that you can all be educated and ready to share your knowledge with the rest of our community. So, a couple of housekeeping things. I'm going to be your MC throughout the day, so I'll be introducing all of our different speakers. I also have the task of keeping us on time. We have a lot to get through in just a few short hours. I've given you all a copy of our schedule for the day, and if you didn't get one, they're on the front of the stage here. So, we have 4 speakers, a video, and a panel discussion. Now, during that panel discussion is when we're going to be taking questions. So instead of asking questions after each presenter finishes, we'll be saving them all to the end. So if you have a question, write it down on your piece of paper, make a mental note, and at the end we'll bring all of our speakers up together and we'll have a great discussion about it, and we'll be able to get a lot of different experts involved in answering that. Also, if you could, please silence your cell phones, and but you're welcome to take any pictures, notes, anything else throughout the presentations today. We're going to be recording them and we'll be posting that on our website and sending you the link. So if you want to rewatch anything or throughout the series, if there's one that you can't make, you're going to be able to watch it online. All right, so with that, I think we're going to get started. Our first speaker of the day is Dr. Jim Masterson. He's a faculty member here at FAU Harbor Branch, and he's going to be kicking us off with a great overview of seafood and sustainability. Where does aquaculture fit in? So take it away, Jim.
All right, thanks very much for coming out this morning. I do appreciate it. We all do. Check. There we are. Okay. We asked all of you when you registered, why are you interested in coming to the workshop? And there were some people interested primarily in the field of aquaculture, but a lot of folks were just seafood lovers. And I joined you guys in that group for sure. So there are lots of benefits of eating seafood, and Laura this afternoon will give you a whole talk on all of those benefits, and I won't steal her thunder, but I will summarize some of them. It is among the healthiest foods we can eat. Lots of nutrients, lots of protein, vitamin D. It's a great source of the omega-3 fatty acids, important for body and brain health. There's other evidence suggesting that eating fish can lower our risk of both heart attacks and stroke. It can lower our risks of autoimmune disease. Asthma can be prevented in children, can protect vision as we age, and can improve sleep quality. Lots of good benefits to including seafood in our diet. As far as around the world, who eats the most seafood? We're not on the top. There's a lot of demand and a growing demand for both wild harvested and cultured products. Seafood is a great source of protein, and in fact, for 1 billion plus people around the world, it's the only readily available source of protein. Our per capita consumption around the world has grown steadily over the last 5 decades. In 1995, it was around 30 pounds a year, and by 2018, it was over 44 pounds per year. And this is mostly due to a persistent high demand for seafood and the fact that we have global aquaculture that is keeping pace to meet that demand because our fisheries aren't doing it. The U.S., we eat less than 20 pounds a year, and we've been flatlined since about 2017 at the same level. We're actually still the 6th largest consumer among the top 10 countries with the highest GDP. Our leading seafood eaters around the world, not surprisingly, China's on top, but they're also leading producers, both in fisheries and in aquaculture, and Japan at 60 pounds a year. So keep calm, eat more seafood, but make your choices sustainable. What is sustainable seafood? That can be either caught or farmed, and it's done so with minimal environmental and social impacts. Benefits of consuming sustainable seafood, including preventing overfishing of those wild stocks, minimizing impacts to other adjacent habitats and other wildlife, identification, protection of essential fish habitats, and importantly, sustainability takes into account the social and economic dynamics, the impacts on the communities where that seafood is either caught or grown. There are lots of different labels indicating sustainable choices, and we're going to have Tally zooming in with us later to tell us all about the Seafood Watch resource to help us make those sustainable choices. Marine Stewardship Council a couple of years ago published a survey, and it was a global survey, and it indicated that more than 80% of consumers do believe it's important that seafood is protected for future generations, and that was good to see. going back in human history, we started out as hunter-gatherers. We were nomads, and we had to move around and go where the food was. And we survived by hunting animals, and that includes fish. We harvested edible wild plant products as well. And then something amazing happened 10 or 12,000 years ago. We began putting down roots. We took up an agrarian existence, and kind of as a byproduct, civilizations and societies sprung out of that. Because we didn't have to move around in search of food. A real milestone in human cultural evolution. But it was largely confined to terrestrial activities. We continue to be hunter-gatherers when we go out and we harvest wild products from the ocean. So we have not evolved very much since the first fish were being plucked out of the oceans, and that's quite amazing. So some history on fisheries. Until the beginning of the last century, there were three factors that really kept commercial fishing pressure from doing huge amounts of damage to our wild stocks. One is that we weren't all that good at catching fish. We were pretty inefficient, and that allowed fish to remain in the wild stocks. We also didn't have the global transport systems that we have now, so we couldn't catch #1 Atlantic bluefin tuna off of Montauk Point and in 24 hours have them in Japan at the markets. We also had a much smaller global population, less hungry mouths to feed than we have now. And all of these together resulted in fishery operations that were, by and large, sustainable, and they didn't threaten the survival of those targeted stocks. Thomas Henry Huxley, he was a contemporary and a defender of Darwin and his theories on evolution. He made this quote. He says, "I still believe the cod fishery and all the great fisheries are inexhaustible. That is to say, nothing we do seriously affects the number of fish." A very learned man, but that was then and this is now. And the times have changed. A growing demand from a growing human population, more mouths to feed, advances in our ability to harvest. We go out further, we fish deeper and longer, and we're much better at catching those fish. So now we are threatening the survival of those fisheries. Inventions in the last 70, 80 years that include purse seines and long lines and high seas drift nets, and the introduction of ocean-going factory trawlers since the 1950s have all taken their toll. This is what commercial fishing looked like in the first part of the 20th century, where you needed 30 people to haul in a catch of menhaden. And now one hydraulic lift net can do the same thing. So we have become much too efficient at harvesting these stocks. And a purse seine can encircle an entire school of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of fish. So this is what has happened in terms of global captures. You see that since the mid-1980s, we've been essentially flatlined in what we are pulling out of the oceans. And that is despite our continued improvements in fishing. That's allowing us to keep pace, but we're not adding to that haul. And that tells you a lot about the numbers of the underlying wild stocks. Since 1974, you see that our numbers of underfished fisheries versus overfished fisheries have flip-flopped. We used to have only about 10% of our fisheries considered overfished and unsustainable in the early 1970s, and now we're at about 90% that are at or beyond capacity. There's no more fish coming out of those wild stocks. At the bottom of all of this is this growing human population. And we passed a milestone a year ago, November, where we added the 8 billionth human to the population. Our growth trajectory is trending down. It took 12 years to add 1 billion people, and it's going to take maybe 15 to 17 years to add the next billion. But those mouths are still there to feed. All right, so aquaculture, does it have a role to play in sustainability and in food security? And the answer is absolutely, it does. Defining aquaculture, this is basically the farming of freshwater and marine plants and animals. If it's done with growing and harvesting a cultured product rather than a wild product, and it's done in the water, it's aquaculture. And this is a solution to those increasing pressures on ocean resources. Overharvest, bycatch issues, those are eliminated through aquaculture. Bycatch is catching non-target animals. Nets are very indiscriminate. Long lines are very indiscriminate, so you're catching a lot of non-target animals, and it's a huge global waste of resources. And when we employ good practices, we can farm seafood in a way that minimizes the adverse impacts on our environment. So I teach a lot of formal coursework on aquaculture, and I use this dual promise of modern aquaculture. Aquaculture can increase global food security. We can feed a growing human population, but we can simultaneously reduce pressure on those overfished stocks. So those are the dual rallying cries that I like people to keep in mind. I could give a whole lecture just on the long history of aquaculture, and I'm going to do it in one slide here, but this isn't a new science. We can go back 4 millennia plus, and we can see that China was fish farming that far back. Polyculture, growing multiple species together to take advantage of trophic complementarity, that was in use by the 6th and 11th centuries in China and then in India. Japan, 2,000 years ago, were growing oysters, and 300 and 400 years ago developed modern macroalgal cultivation techniques that are still in use. The Greeks, the Romans, they were growing a lot of indigenous crops. European monks were growing carps. This was the first introduced species for agricultural purposes. Asian carps introduced to Europe for aquaculture. And then we're late to the game in the United States, but by the 1950s, we entered into large-scale commercial aquaculture with our Southeast catfish industry. Okay, so modern global aquaculture, this is where I'm going to spend most of the rest of the talk. We need some selection criteria. Is the target organism growable? Is it feasible to grow this organism? Do we have appropriate infrastructure to grow a candidate species? Is there a demand for that crop? That's very important. Just because we can grow it, we don't know if we're going to have a market for it. And are there regulatory concerns that we need to be mindful of? Finally, but certainly not least important, can somebody make a buck doing it? Can these animals be grown at a profit? What crops do we grow around the world? We have a number of finfish species that we grow, and that's going to be the focus of the March workshop. Crustaceans are grown, prawns and shrimp and crayfish and crabs around the world. We're going to talk about those and mollusks in April. So oysters and mussels and scallops and clams and even abalone and conch. There's candidate species, and this is a lot of what Harbor Branch does. We try to figure out the ins and outs of the life cycles of species that we'd like to break into the market. And this is a big focus of a lot of United States aquaculture research. And there's non-food aquaculture endeavors as well. Aquaculture for stock enhancement purposes to try to augment depleted sport and commercial fisheries. Bait production. Arkansas is a top 10 aquaculture producer because they have a mature bait fish industry. Ornamental aquaculture, huge in Florida, and Katrina's going to touch on that, so I won't steal her thunder. Biomedical applications, algal culture for non-food purposes, aquaculture for scientific research. Aquaponics is marrying aquaculture and hydroponics, so all of those plant crops can be included as well. And on the marine side, folks here at Harbor Branch are exploring sea veggies, growing salt marsh type organisms for human consumption as well. So quite a diversity in the crops that are grown. As far as the systems in use, we've got 3 basic systems, and I'd usually spend a class in a college course talking about each of these systems. We'll do it in one slide. Open culture refers to how freely the system communicates with the adjacent environment. So cages and pens and staking bags of clams to the bottom of the estuary are all open culture systems. Our semi-closed systems include ponds and raceways. Ponds remain the #1 system around the world for growing cultured stocks. And then closed systems, or RAS, recirculating aquaculture systems. This is what we do at Harbor Branch. This is more and more becoming the future of the industry. We can put aquaculture on a scale from extensive, low input, low output to intensive, where for very high inputs and outputs. On this side, you've got the artisanal and subsistence pond culture. Very little inputs. You might not even be feeding the fish. You might be fertilizing the pond and letting the fish consume the natural productivity of the pond. Very little investment, but you're only getting a small harvest at the end of a season. On the other side, you've got intense stocking, very heavy feeding, and little to no reliance on natural food. And so our super intensive systems fall out there. There's a risk reward involved here, where there's more management, higher cost, and an increased susceptibility to disease as you push the envelope towards intensive culture. Closed versus open life cycle is a contrast as well. There are some industries that still go out to the wild to collect one or more stages in a life history. There's still some shrimp operations where you have larvaros. You have people going out and catching the late stage post larvae to grow out in an aquaculture operation. A research facility like us, we may be going out and catching brood stocks for candidate species that we have not brought fully under cultivation. But this is the goal. Closed cycle culture, where every life history stage, from broodstock maturation to spawning, larva culture, juvenile, and final grow out, is happening in a captive environment. And then we're really walking it like we talk it about not impacting those wild stocks. This is a wonderful resource, the State of the World Fisheries and Aquaculture. Every 2 years it comes out. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization puts it out, and it's a wonderful snapshot of aquaculture. There's a several hundred-page master document, and then usually about a 30-page summary document, and a lot of what I'm going to show you here comes from that. So world capture, the blue, light and dark, is wild harvest, and the light pink and the darker pink is aquaculture. And you can see since about 1985 the increase in aquaculture production, and basically all of that augmented harvest is coming from farms and not from wild stocks. We see that Asia dominates the industry, and over 90% of the production is coming from Asia. 2/3 of the production is just coming from China. We see that finfish dominate the story, and it's freshwater finfish. Marine finfish, it is a small but rapidly growing category. We're going to talk about that in March. Saltwater finfish and how that area can grow. Molluscan aquaculture comes in second. Crustacean culture is continuing to expand as well, but that's a wonderful trajectory to see for the industry. As far as providing jobs, there's over 20 million primary sector aquaculture jobs around the world. Most of those are in Asia, but that's because more than 90% of the production is there. And even though we've got about 20,000 people employed, 20 million, people employed in aquaculture, there's about twice that still in the traditional fishing sectors. Around 2010, we hit a milestone where we were growing more fish than we were catching from the wild. This figure shows it more like 2013, 2014, but somewhere in there, the world was growing more fish than it was harvesting, and that happened more rapidly than a lot of food security experts predicted, and it was a wonderful thing for us to see. In the United States, we're down on the list. We rank 18th currently, according to a 2022 NOAA publication, and we were once among the top 5 producers. We import 70 to 85% of all of our seafood. That number has hit 90% as well, and our seafood trade deficit is only second to our oil trade deficit. So we are importing far more fish than we are either catching or growing domestically. Often we cite the stringent regulations. Federal and state regulations is the main reason we lag so far behind. There's a lot of other factors. Katrina's probably going to touch on some of those things as far as Florida aquaculture, but that's only part of the story. There's 15 states where aquaculture is primarily focused, and if we look at the top species, catfish is a huge part of domestic aquaculture. The Southeast, where catfish is king, and trout in Idaho and North Carolina is also big as far as food fish. Oysters and clams top the molluscan category. Crawfish in the Southeast and saltwater fish top the crustacean category. We have really been challenged to bring marine shrimp culture into the modern era. Disease has been an issue around the world. We're really pushing for high-intensity shrimp aquaculture. We've got a group coming in April from Indiantown that's going to be talking about their operations, and I'm looking forward to that. If you add those numbers up, that's a little more than $1 billion. If you add the species that didn't make that top 2, it's about $1.5 billion in production. So it's a fraction of global production, that $280 billion number that I showed you guys. We use all the same culture systems in the United States as we see around the world. We grow shellfish in open culture systems, bags that are staked to the estuary, or trays that are on the bottom or off bottom to grow our oysters and our clams. We're using some offshore cages. We lag behind compared to a lot of the world as far as our cage culture, and there are regulatory issues, but there are some very aquaculture friendly states, including Florida, that want to see this industry grow, and we're working towards ecologically manageable offshore cage culture as well. You can grow seaweed in these open environments as well. I've talked mostly about animals, but macroalgae is part of our aquaculture production output as well. We use semi-closed systems here in the United States. Ponds are more than 40% of our total farming operations in the United States. Raceways, that's where the trout are being grown. And we're seeing more and more use of tank-based aquaculture. Tanks give you the advantage of deciding when, how, or even if you're going to discharge waste products to the environment. You have absolute control over the fate of the inputs to your system. It's a more expensive way to grow animals. You have to figure out how to recycle and reuse the water, so there's a heavy investment in filtration, but the economics are shifting, and this is becoming a viable option. So this is our top 10 here. We come in 9th out of the top 10 here, and Katrina is going to give us most of these details here, and so I'm just going to put up a little taste of what I think we're about to hear about Florida. But we are very diverse in what we grow, and it's things that you might not think about: alligators and ornamentals and aquatic plants that aren't necessarily the first thing you think about when you think about our aquaculture operations. So the last couple minutes that I have, I do want to go through the old myth versus reality checklist here. And you've all heard, well, isn't aquaculture bad for the environment? And the answer is no, not if you site your farms appropriately and not if you use best management practices. We have more control over the fate of our wastes and our animals in these cultivated systems. We also eliminate the bycatch issues entirely. Isn't farm seafood full of antibiotics? I know Laura's going to touch on this, but although we use the antibiotics, there's a lot of regulations that ensure that nothing you purchase has detectable levels of antibiotics in them. So that's not an issue. Is farm seafood less healthy than the wild-caught seafood? I get asked this question all the time, and the fact is that the nutrition in that seafood, it's determined by the diet you provide, and we have complete control of that diet. So the problems with heavy metals and methylmercury, those sorts of things you worry about with wild fish, you don't have those concerns with aquacultured products. And do we even need aquaculture to meet our demand? We should know at the end of this first half hour that, of course, we need seafood. Otherwise, we wouldn't have augmented those production numbers since the mid-1980s. So aquaculture, it's not inherently positive or negative, and with a lot of industrial practices, there's pros and cons, but we can find a balance so we can enjoy our seafood, we can provide food security, and we can do it without damaging our environment. There are potential impacts that we need to be aware of. So habitat loss, habitat degradation is an issue we need to be mindful of. Natural resource depletion. The industry still does make use of fish meal, fish oil, fisheries products that we'd like to wean ourselves off of, and there's a lot of research toward that goal. So we really do walk it like we talk it, and we are hands-off as far as the capture fisheries. Nutrient waste impacts, chemical waste impacts, problems with exotic introductions. And aquaculture has been culpable in introducing exotics around the world, so we need to own that and be mindful of that. And how we control predators. Do we have to use lethal means to control avian and mammalian predators, or are there non-lethal means that we can take? And with that, I am going to pass back to Gabby, remind you to come back and see us in March, where we're going to focus on finfish. Thank you guys very much.
Hey, Joey. Yeah. Hey. Okay. That's a lot of information to go through in 30 minutes. So awesome work, Jim. Of course, if you have questions for Jim or about that content, we'll discuss them during our panel. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Her name is Katerina Bayless, and she drove all the way down from Tallahassee today. Yesterday, right? To be here with us. She is with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So she's going to give us a very interesting perspective on our regulations here in Florida and more about our industry. So a very warm welcome to Katrina, and thank you so much for coming all the way to be here. Enjoy.
So I want to first start by saying thank you to Jim. Some of these slides are going to look a little familiar. I'll take credit for some of them and give him credit for taking them from us. But that's the fun part about working in aquaculture education is we're a small community and we talk a lot about the same things. So again, my name is Katrina Bayless. I am the Education and Development Program Administrator for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Division of Aquaculture. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit more about the regulatory side, but please forgive me, I can't help it. Most of what I do is talk to K through 12 educators about bringing aquaculture into their classrooms. So if I make a lot of stupid jokes, it's because I'm used to talking to kids and teachers, and we're going to do a lot of looking at pictures. So we're going to talk a little bit about the stats and go back over some of the global perspectives for aquaculture, but you're going to see a lot of really pretty pictures regarding the industry. So what are we going to talk about today? Hang on. Oop. Okay, we're going to click this way then. Maybe. Hang on, let's try this again. There we go. Okay, so our overview for today's presentation, we're going to, again, talk about Florida's aquaculture industry, go a little bit over species and methods. Some of these are going to be a bit redundant on Jim's presentation, but it's always good to hear stuff twice. Go over some production values for Florida and globally, and how the industry is moving forward. What does that look like? So Florida's aquaculture industry was developed in partnership with the Florida Aquaculture Policy Act, which is Chapter 597 in Florida statute. So we have statute in our laws in Florida that establish the intent of the legislator to enhance the growth of aquaculture while protecting Florida's environment. It also authorized the creation of Aquaculture Certificate of Registration, which is how we keep track of our farmers. If you're an aquaculture farmer in the state of Florida, you are required to have this certificate of registration. It also established our best management practices and our best management practices program. And unlike some other places around the country, best management practices are not just guidelines in Florida. They are requirements of our farmers to follow these guidelines in order to not only make sure that it's safe for the farm, for the animals, but also for the environment. So this policy act also made sure that aquaculture is defined in statute as agriculture. That means that our farmers in aquaculture get the same benefits that our ag farmers do and are held up to the same accountability. What are our best management practices? What do they look like? So they ensure environmental protection. That is above all what we're looking for with our best management practices. So for our farmers, we have initial on-site inspections to verify the designs, the constructions, and those requirements are met, and that what has been given to our inspectors is actually what the farmers are doing at their facility. Every farm has periodic unannounced inspections at least twice per year. If something is going on, we may visit them more often, but it's just to make sure, again, accountability, that they are following these required regulations. Our inspectors look for things like documentation, making sure their containment for their species is up to date and safe. Their water discharge rates are what they say they are. They're treating their effluent. So we talked a little bit about escapes with Jim's presentation, making sure that nothing's escaping these facilities, making sure that the nutrient load they're putting into the environment around them is at safe levels, and that we are also protecting wetlands and floodplain impacts. So we do have things like restricted species that are unable to be grown in specific areas because it does not meet the floodplain requirements. So in Florida, we are lucky enough to, again, have written in Florida statute a definition for aquaculture. I keep saying in Florida. This is not common across the United States. We are actually one of the few states that has a designated aquaculture division. So sometimes when you go around the state, and it's really fun to talk about to other regulators about this sort of stuff, it can be all over the place. In some states, freshwater aquaculture and saltwater aquaculture are two completely different entities. Sometimes they just choose to ignore that it exists, but we would rather take a hands-on approach when it comes to regulating these things so we know what is happening in our state. But aquaculture is defined as an aquatic organism and any product derived from aquatic organisms that are owned and propagated, grown or produced under controlled conditions. So when we talk about this, and I bring this up to children or you guys in the audience, when we say aquaculture products, most people think fish, but this also includes things like alligators and turtles and axolotls, and we'll talk a little bit about those later. So Florida's aquaculture industry, and as Jim's presentation, I love seeing those slides, because if you look at the survey data that's reported, we have 386 farms. We do not have 386 farms. We have over 1,000 farms in the state of Florida. That's the fun part about surveys. No one wants to fill them out. But we have over 1,500 species or varieties of fish, the difference there being Color morphs, just like dogs are the same species but different breeds, we have that same thing when it comes to ornamentals. So it might be the same species of fish, but very different and constitutes a different variety. But we raise fish, plants, mollusks, crustaceans, aquatic reptiles, all sorts of things. We also have over 800 aquatic submerged land leases. So this is our coastal aquaculture, covering close to 2,700 acres around the state of Florida. We raise tons of things for different reasons, for ornamental, food, bait markets, stocking, conservation, research, educational purposes, all sorts of reasons. So why Florida? Why do we have 1,000 farms in Florida raising aquaculture products? The number one reason is the climate. It's wonderful here, okay? Our farmers are able to raise tropical and subtropical species outside. So when you take that, when we talked earlier, can we make a profit? If you don't have to climate control, you are really decreasing how much money you have to spend on your facility because you can take your species and raise them outside in the natural environment. We also have proximity to large ports and shipping corridors that allow our farmers to get product to consumers as fast as possible. So that ensures the safety of live animals as they're transported, but also the freshness of food products as they're transported to consumers. We also have streamlined regulations. I said earlier that a division of aquaculture is kind of rare in the country. We are doing the best we can to put the regulatory burden on us instead of our farmers. So we're doing everything we can to make sure it goes quickly, lessen the financial burden for them, because permits are incredibly expensive. There's a lot of know-how required to get them, and if we can cover our farmers under our programmatic general permits instead of requiring to get their own, we can help the industry grow. So I apologize that this chart's kind of a little hard to see because of the colors, but you'll notice over the last 10 years, the industry hasn't really grown in the number of farms. We've kind of been sitting around this 1,000 number. The difference is what we're raising. So what we've seen in the last 10 years is an incredible diversification of the products that we raise in Florida. There's a lot of kind of specifics in ornamental production that has kind of boomed into a lot of different species. We've also seen some growth in our shellfish industry. So clams have been kind of a bread and butter product for a really long time, and we're now seeing a large increase in oysters as well coming into Florida. We're seeing a growth in the ornamental industry from the saltwater side as well. We'll talk a little bit about freshwater ornamentals in a minute. But my favorite part about looking at this is incredibly boiled down data. When I tell you our databases for this looking very, very different. But watching these trends and watching our farmers adapt to the industry and adapt their commodities to what sells has been very interesting, especially with advancements in technology. So this is our snapshot of what Florida's aquaculture industry looks right now. This is a county map of Florida. You can see that a large number of our counties in Florida kind of sit that 1 to 10 producer section. I'm going to ask for participation from the audience right now. Can anybody tell me what that rust-colored county is right there? It is Levy County. So if you've never been to Cedar Key, Florida, it is a tiny, tiny little town that has over 200 farms. Now, how do you fit 200 farms in a tiny little town? They're off the coast. So they're in the coastal waters, and they're clam and oyster facilities. So the fun part about these farms is we love to tell people, Cedar Key has all of these farms. You can't see them. They're under the water. So it's fun to talk about these things in this tiny town, and I love telling students about this town because it's so small and has done such a wonderful thing with clams. They were actually the #1 producer of clams in the United States up until about 8 to 10 years ago, where they were taken over, but they're still doing wonderful things in their clam production. We are the #1 producer of ornamental fish in the country. We produce, are you ready for this? 95% of the freshwater ornamentals produced in the United States come from Florida farms. So I tell kids, you could go to a Petco or a PetSmart in Washington State, and the likelihood when you go back to those tanks in the back of the store that they are a Florida product is very high. We produce so many freshwater ornamentals. And like I said, we are increasing the number of saltwater ornamentals that we produce because they are most of the time a higher valued product, but they can be really tricky from feed and life cycles. So there's a lot of research being done for our UF IFAS and Harbor Branch and other research facilities that are making the technology that allows our farmers to do this profitably. We are 4 in the nation for shellfish, 2 in alligators, and 1 in aquatic plants. I'll put a little asterisk on that data. They lumped it in the last survey they did with another thing, so we don't know if we are truly #1 still in aquatic plants, but I'd like to say we are. As you can see by this chart here, even though we're #1 in aquatic plants, it's only 4% of our production. Shellfish has taken over as a large percent of our production in Florida, and then ornamentals sits around 30%. What we've talked about today and what you guys will continue to hear about in the presentations is the food fish sector. So we only have 70% or 17% of our industry is food fish, but they can be high value food fish products. So economic impact. I'm going to put another asterisk on this slide. There's a note at the bottom here. I can tell you these numbers are incredibly low. Survey data is very challenging. So what USDA does is sends out what they refer to as a census of aquaculture to all aquaculture farmers, okay? Farmers are busy people. I have a hard time getting them to respond to emails that they are required to respond to, let alone fill out a survey that they don't have to fill out. So when we get these data from the Census of Aquaculture, internally we like to take a look at it and say, okay, we know that these numbers are wrong because this is what we see in the industry. So UF IFAS, Tropical Aquaculture Lab, did a really small study of ornamental fish farmers in 2022, asking how much they were actually making off of their farms. This data suggests that the data that USDA has released is close to 40% of the industry. So we are incredibly underreporting the numbers that we're actually seeing simply because the data is not required to be reported through these surveys. So for total annual sales values, it's well over $71 million in farm gate value. We're 9th in the United States for total aquaculture, but like I said, 1st in ornamentals, 2nd in alligators, 4th in shellfish, and over $172 million in sales for 2021. That number right there of 1,100 employees, again, self-reported. I can tell you it's low, right? We see a lot more of this in the industry. And it's important to take that data that you read with a grain of salt, right? How do we encourage them? How do we tell our farmers, please, please, please report, because we want to brag about you guys. We want people in the world to know how important you are to the industry. So let's talk a little bit about species and methods. Some of these are going to look a little familiar as we go through. But like I said, one of the #1 products we produce here, at least in variety, is ornamental products. So ornamentals, like I say, ornaments on a Christmas tree. You're not eating these fish. They are just pretty to look at. Freshwater ornamentals are our bread and butter, 95% in Florida, right? But we're growing technology and making advancements in saltwater aquaculture and for these ornamental products. And what I like to tell my kids is one of the largest success stories in the history of aquaculture is going to be our clownfish. So prior to, I sent us back about 30 years ago, most ornamentals that were put into the aquarium trade were taken from the wild, right, 30, 50 years ago. And we decided to start making tons of clownfish. Now, 98% of clownfish that are in the aquarium trade are actually aquaculture products. It's probably closer to 99, depending on who you look at the data, which is amazing. That means we're not taking them from the wild. We're able to farm them on farms instead of going out to coral reefs and taking them off the reefs. We also raise food fish, and you're going to look at this slide and say a shrimp is not a fish, but I like to categorize stuff like this. So our food products are also incredibly diverse. Who knew that we raised caviar? We have caviar farms in Florida. We raise sturgeon. So a couple people. That's most one that shocks people when we have that conversation. We also raise tilapia, things like shrimp, and our saltwater industry is also starting to grow. Again, those high-value commodities like pompano and cobia. We raise shellfish in our facilities as well. Most of these are coastal farms that are on leases. Clams, again, are bread and butter staple products, but oysters are rapidly growing in the state of Florida. We also raise aquatic reptiles and amphibians. So alligators count as aquaculture products, even though they do not spend all of their life in water. They, crawl around on land. My favorite thing to talk about, another success story, is alligators, and I unfortunately don't have a lot of time to get into it. But with kids, I like to tell them that alligator farmers have done an amazing job at selling their commodity. They've sold every part of the alligator, right? So would you buy a ticket to drive through a cow pasture? Probably not. But our alligator farms have discovered that people will pay money to come see their ag product, right? So St. Augustine Alligator Farm, Gatorama, Gatorland, they're not just amusement parks. They're aquaculture facilities. So most of the large gators you see are just display alligators, but they have all of the ones in the back that are around 4 feet, and those are their ag products, okay? So they're able to not only sell the meat, the hides, but they're also able to sell the look of their commodity, which is incredible. We also have an emergence in things like axolotls when it comes to this industry. There's a growth in those sort of amphibian side of things that's kind of a new budding industry in Florida as far as it comes for regulations. We also raise aquatic plants. So if you dig a hole in the ground for your golf course or your apartment complex and you fill it with water, it's not just going to grow plants out of nowhere. They have to come from somewhere. And those come from our aquaculture facilities, right? So most of the aquatic plants we raise are ornamental, either for aquariums or for outplanting in things like ponds. And much more. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through every single of 1,000 farms that we have in the state of Florida, but I'd like to highlight the uses for seaweed. Unfortunately, because of how our regulations sit right now, we don't have seaweed facilities in the state of Florida, especially offshore. So we do have a couple inland facilities, but we're currently working on including those regulations in our offshore programmatic general permit, because I think it's an incredibly important industry. You saw on Jim's slides that algae aquaculture globally is huge. We just haven't in Florida been able to match the regulation requirements, but it's in the works, I promise. As of last year, our programmatic general permit allows seaweed aquaculture to be grown in existing gear. So our shellfish farmers can actually seed their cages with seaweed and oysters and clams and grow 2 commodities on their farm. Again, diversification. We want to make sure that they are always having something to sell, or if something goes wrong with one, they have a backup on another. And the reason I think seaweed is the next big product for the state of Florida is, one, our water is really warm. Seaweed grows incredibly fast. It is doing nothing but pulling out nutrients in the water, which is great for nutrient mitigation on our coasts. And it's also got uses that are all over the place. You don't just have to eat it. So if you're taking all of that nasty stuff out of the water, we obviously don't want that to be a food product, but it can be used for things like biofuels, bioplastics, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics are some of the largest industries for algae. And I think this is the next sector that we're going to go into. Okay, this is where we are now seeing things that are incredibly familiar, but our system types: tanks, ponds, raceways. Again, tanks are really big in Florida, ponds are really big in Florida because of our climate, right? And I just want to reiterate, these are really large ponds that you see up here. Most of the ponds we have in Florida are smaller, but it doesn't have to be a big fish to go in this pond. So we have ornamental farmers that raise thousands or hundreds of thousands of tiny fish in ponds, right? So we have angelfish. Everybody know what an angelfish is. They are pretty distinct, right? They're only about this big at max, probably about this big. You can raise those in ponds outside in Florida. It's just another way, instead of having them inside in facilities, to raise our aquaculture products. Just want to touch base again on this, on our coastal shellfish aquaculture. This is minimally impacted as it pertains to the species, right? So we don't have to feed them. We put them out, they take stuff out of the water, and then we sell them as product. Now, I do want to reiterate, I just told you that these are, in the water. I told you algae takes bad stuff out of the water. This stuff also can take bad stuff out of the water. That's why we have the regulations that we do. So you can go on to FDAC's website and see if these leases are open or closed for harvest. That means, so if we get something like a red tide bloom, if we get something like a large rain event that is putting runoff into the coastal environment, we will shut the leases down for harvest until they are proven purged of any bad before they are sold. Again, just to make sure that you as the consumer are getting the safest products. And back to aquaponics, there is one at Harbor Branch. I do just want to touch base on this because this is the most common method of system that we put in our schools. So when I go set systems up in schools, talk to teachers, I will bring them an aquaponic system, not just a normal RAS system or recirculating aquaculture system. The reason for that is teachers need a reason to spend time on this in their classroom. They have to, they have to validate it to their principal, to their higher ups to make sure that why they're spending time and money on this system. So they can teach plant physiology, animal physiology, the nitrogen cycle, symbiotic relationships between plant and animals, animal husbandry, dealing with food safety, all from one system. Most of the systems we have in schools don't look this large. They're significantly smaller, maxing out at about 300 gallons. But we've had a lot of success. Kids are incredibly interested in knowing where their food comes from, and having that responsibility of taking care of these plants and animals gives them much better respect for the process of agriculture production. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about offshore cages later, so I'm going to skip through that. So let's talk production values. And I apologize if I go quickly through this, but I don't want to reiterate so much of what Jim said in his last presentation. So one of the first things I ask the students I talk to is, where does your fish come, or where does your food come from, right? Most of them say the grocery store. Comes in a nice, pretty pre-packaged fillet or sitting at the ice in the back of the seafood counter. But I make sure to tell them your food has a history. It's incredibly important to know the history of your food, right? So on that note, only about 19, it's approaching, if it's 90, so it's 10% of domestic production, right? So most of it's coming from overseas. And our farmers are doing the best they can to advance in technologies and combat, or at least be at the table with overseas producers. Most of the issue with this is price. It's a lot cheaper to with those import products. You're buying cheaper product. Unfortunately, most of our tilapia production in the state of Florida is not sold as fillets in the state of Florida because overseas production is so cheap. They actually have to sell them as live product to live markets in places like Houston or New York. So it's one of those things, how do we advance this technology in order to make it so that our farmers can compete with overseas imported production? So I noticed your slide on this, and this kind of made me laugh. It's funny when you get survey data, and a lot of it is estimations. It depends how you read the data, because this is going to show California is the #1 food fish producer, and I think that is value, even though they were like number 5 or 6 in total aquaculture production. But Florida's #2. Even though it is only 17% of our industry in Florida, Florida's food fish production represents 16% of the total industry. These are high value products, right? High value products that is why California, being 5th or 6th on the list in total aquaculture production, is #1 in the sale of products. I will say, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, there is a new aquaculture facility, relatively new aquaculture facility called Atlantic Sapphire. So we raise salmon in Florida, start to finish, in one facility. When that system gets up to full production value, it will financially overshadow almost every other farm in the state of Florida. That is the type of products we're looking for our farmers. Obviously, it's incredibly intensive, and there's a lot of startup cost for something like that not every mom and pop farm can do. But we're looking at our farms and looking at the future in terms of technological advancement. So food fish are the primary products cultured in the U.S. It was 71% of the industry in 98, 53% of the industry in 2013. Although the market share has declined by 18% in 15 years, production has increased. This just means the industry is getting more diverse. We're starting to focus on other things, but while still increasing aquaculture production as a whole. This is my smattering, this is because I don't want to look at words anymore, of Florida's food fish industry. So some of these aren't food. I like to count them, or aren't fish, but I like to count them as food fish products because I want you guys to recognize the diversity of products that we produce in the state of Florida. So some of these are kind of our bread and butter, like I talked about. Tilapia is one of the big ones, but some of them are new, and clams are one of the big ones, but some of them are new and advancing. Oysters are coming up. We just recently got largemouth bass approved as a food product. We raise things, freshwater, saltwater, all sorts of things. And obviously the sturgeon facilities that I talked about. I can't hit hard enough. The diversification of products is the future of aquaculture in Florida, right? Our farmers don't want to always raise the same thing the guy next to them is raising because the market may be saturated. So with certain industries, the market's never going to be saturated. That's clams. You talk to our clam guys, they never have enough clams for everybody. They're constantly they're sending people who want to buy clams to other farmers, which is unheard of in the ag industry. Most of the time, they're like, no, we'll find a way to sell this. Don't worry about it. But with other things and with other markets, they have to look for something unique. They have to look for something that someone wants to sell. And sometimes that's a different product completely, and sometimes that's a different version of the product. So if you look at the tilapia up there in the corner, it looks kind of boring. When you see that fish right there, most of the time you guys see that fish, it is a fillet, right? It doesn't look like that. It looks like a fillet. For the live trade, or for the live industry, which is what most of our farmers that sell tilapia in Florida do, they're orange. They're bright orange. You can imagine something like that looks way better in a tank at a display in a grocery store than that one would, right? So it's a way to think about the industry and these commodities to sell these products. I have no clue how I'm doing on time, by the way. Oh, we're getting there. 5 minutes? Thank you. Okay, moving forward. Perfect. So again, increasing human population means we need more food, right? So I'm going to kind of skip through this for a second and go to this slide. This is the reverse of the slide that Jim showed. So it's the same thing, just in a different direction. So I want to reiterate, as part of Jim's conversation, aquaculture is not a replacement for wild harvest, okay? We are not in competition. We are not trying to put wild harvesters out of business. The demand is there for everybody. We are filling in those gaps because wild harvest cannot increase. That big chunk in the middle is that fully maximized but sustainably fished. We've got that overfished in the bottom and that tiny little bit of growth that can still happen at the top there, right? So that means that wild fisheries is tapped out. We can't do anymore. But demand for seafood is still growing. So how do we fill that gap in? The solution, obviously, as Jim said earlier, and as I'm here to talk to you about today, is aquaculture. So to put this into context, as of 2013, more fish is being farmed than beef in the world, okay? Fish is the #1 product that people want or that people use as a source of protein. And around 2017, this is the fun part about this data, is it could be between 2010 and 2018, aquaculture production passed wild fisheries in tons produced, which is amazing. I think we sit at about 53% right now, but we're very proud of that, right? People want seafood. We have to fill in that demand. So we are growing fast as an industry and a regulatory agency. We're trying to fit in our permits what our farmers need in order to be successful. We're trying to take that regulatory burden and that financial burden of the regulatory process away from our farmers and help them be successful, while also making sure that we are minimizing and mitigating environmental impacts, making sure that our farmers and their products are safe, and making sure that you as the consumer receiving those food products are as safe as you can be. On the horizon for us, and you can see there's a lot of education on this because that is my wheelhouse, that's my baby, is more educator training. Our industry is very large. Kids know that we raise cattle and oranges in Florida, but only 23% of the students in K through 12 organizations know that aquaculture even exists, and less than that are able to define what aquaculture as an industry is. In my heart, it's incredibly important that our kids and our future knows the industries that exist in Florida and the benefits of the industry so that they grow up to be, productive citizens and informed consumers about the industry. We're also planning on expanding resources for colleges and universities. There's been a bump in technical training in high schools, and we're hoping to transfer that into universities that don't necessarily have these technical programs in their schools. We'd also like to work further with UF-IFAS and places in research colleges like Harbor Branch and Moat Marine Lab to increase farmer-focused materials and trainings. Technology can be challenging for farmers that have done something the same way for decades. Now, don't get me wrong, that doing the same thing for decades can be tried and true, and there are some hard-learned lessons that are incredibly important for these farmers. But making sure that they know these advancements that can help them be more productive on their farms and be more successful in their businesses is incredibly important to us. We've also been asked by UF-IFAS to increase resources for hobbyists and homesteaders. So this isn't commercial, like large commercial scale production. This is, I want to raise food in my backyard. How do I do that? So we're going to start increasing our resources for small scale aquaponics and RAS systems that can be used in anybody in their homes. I'm going to skip this slide really quickly and talk a little bit about offshore. So with these dramatic innovations in technology and engineering in the past decade comes a new budding industry. Offshore aquaculture in this term does not really exist in Florida because it is not present in our permits. We are currently working on that. It has been probably about 6 years of us trying to get these permits. And I tell you that number just so you know that we are not doing this quickly without thinking. We want to make sure that the impacts to the environment, especially in the Gulf of Mexico and the east coast of Florida, is as little as possible. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that anybody who's using this ocean space has been taken into consideration. So whether that's shipping lanes or military bases or shipwrecks or things that are, important to the people in the area, as well as making sure that we're mitigating any environmental impacts as we put these in. So with new cages and moorings, we're making sure that things like releases and stuff like that, escapes, damage to them is lessened. Looking into advancements in harvesting, maintenance, and feed practices. There's a lot of really interesting AI that comes into feed practices that make sure that every single piece of feed that you put in your farm is eaten by fish and doesn't go to the bottom. We're also looking into things like health management and genetics. So we want to make sure that the fish we put in these cages come from broodstock that is native to that area, so that just in case if something gets released, it's not impacting the genetics. And then advancements in digital monitoring and remote sensing and making sure that we have those regulations and BMPs in place. And I apologize for going over a little bit, but thank you so much for your time.
Presentation. I learned so much. I could listen to you talk for another hour. I think that was really, really great. I had no idea that we were growing axolotls here. That's amazing. Really, really interesting. I think that's my favorite part so far about the series is it's such a nice overview of all the different things that we're doing, and we'll be digging deeper into these as we go. Katrina mentioned the clam farming industry. One of our speakers during the shellfish workshop is actually from Cedar Key. And also Atlantic Sapphire, their marketing manager is presenting next month during our fish series. So it's all connected, and I'm just so excited seeing how everything's playing out. So with that, our next presentation is Tally Height. She is with the internationally recognized Seafood Watch program. How many of you have seen the Seafood Watch pamphlets, or you keep them in your wallet? She'll mention them, of course, during her presentation, but we have some down on the stage for you to take as well. And she is zooming in today from, are you in Washington, D.C., Tally?
I am.
You are? Okay, awesome. Well, so we're so excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for participating in our workshop. Tally's presentation is called Consumer Tips for Enjoying Seafood Sustainably, and I'm going to pass it over to her as well as Joey, who's going to help facilitate our Zoom transition here. Enjoy the presentation, and thanks again, Tally. Give her a round of applause.
Okay. Joey, am I free to get started? Okay. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to you all about the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program, as well as the tools that consumers can use to make sustainable choices when out at restaurants, shopping, or dining. So again, my name is Tally Height, and I'm on the outreach team. And I'll have my contact information at the end of this PowerPoint. So if there's anything that comes up, if you have questions, I will stay till noon to answer questions if anyone has any. But you can also just email me, reach out whenever, and I'm an open book. So. All right, so the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program is a recommendations program, and we use a stoplight system for our recommendations. So there are 3 recommendations that can result in an assessment of ours. So the first is our best choice. So these are going to be scoring really high against our sustainability criteria, which I will go over in a bit more detail after these slides. So we recommend that you buy these first. These are the best performing in terms of sustainability that you can find for the species that you're looking for. Yellow is going to be categorized as good alternative. So we still recommend that you buy these. However, we just want to flag that there's going to be something within the fishing or farming method that we don't exactly co-sign, and just want to flag there's room for improvement there. So our recommendations are reassessed every 3 to 5 years. So we'll keep a special eye on what those indicators were, and hopefully they will have improved. However, sometimes good alternatives do drop down to an avoid, which is our final recommendation. So we don't recommend that folks buy these. We ask that you take a pass on these for now, because they're either fished or farmed in ways that are unsustainable, detrimental to wildlife or the environment, and improvements need to be made in those industries. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program is not an eco-certified program. So we're different than a program like MSC. However, we are partnered with some eco-certifying programs. So when you go to our website and you're searching through our recommendations, which I'll also show you how to do a little bit later, you might see best choice, good alternative, avoid. But you might also see some blue eco-certified products. And basically what that means is we don't want to replicate work. So we have really great partners that are assessing fisheries on an eco-certified basis around the world. So we don't want to go in and just repeat that work. So when eco-certified products align with our sustainability criteria, we will showcase those on our website. So just, hey, we didn't assess this, but MSC did, and we co-sign it, so go for it. Okay, so I know we're talking about aquaculture today, but I'm gonna go through the fishery standards really fast. There are 4 fishery standards that we assess fisheries based on. So the first is impacts on the stock. So that's the population of the species itself. So is it able to reproduce at a rate that it can replenish what fishers are taking out of the environment? The second is going to be impacts on other species. So that's bycatch, right? So we're looking at how many species and how many different and how many individuals of that species are dying unnecessarily due to the fishing practices at work here. So that's going to have to do a lot with fishing gear and technology. I'm going to skip to the fourth, which is impact on habitats and ecosystems. So we like to look at the ecosystem as a whole as much as we can, because ecosystems work with lots of checks and balances, and we don't want to say, oh, well, the stock's fine, there's no bycatch, but we're wrecking the entire habitat. So the ecosystem can no longer function in a way that is healthy. And we also want to foster empathy for other animals, right? So even though we're not eating every animal in an ecosystem, we don't want to degrade their habitat just because they're not commercially valuable to us. And then jumping back to management effectiveness, we're looking at what management is in place to ensure that the health of the fishery is maintained long term, right? So impacts on stock, other species, and impacts on habitats or ecosystems can all look really good. But if there's not long-term and conservative management in place for a fishery, all of those standards and can basically falter really fast and quickly, and the fishery can decline really, really rapidly. So we want to make sure that we're ensuring the long-term health of the fishery through effective management. Okay, so now we're on to the aquaculture standard, which there's a lot more criteria for the aquaculture standard. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but as we've learned in the from the past two presenters, aquaculture is highly varied. There's just a myriad of ways that you can raise seafood products for consumption or for like aquarium trade, right? So we've got marine net pens, we have RAS systems, we have raceways. There's just so many different ways that you can raise seafood products, which is part of the reason that there are so many more standards for the aquaculture criteria. So the first presenter pointed out this a little bit, which is feed. So we're going to look at when you're raising your aquaculture product, you're taking a stressor off the environment. You're not taking that fish or other sea creature out of the ocean. However, if you're feeding them an entirely wild-based food, you're still creating a pressure on the ocean. So when we're assessing a aquaculture production, we're looking at what feed is the product getting and what is the rating of that product. So if they're getting a bunch of anchovies that are red rated by us, that's not going to be sustainable. We're also looking at the source of the stock. So do they have their own hatchery, or are they taking juveniles out of the ocean and then raising them up to market size, basically, in the aquaculture industry? We're looking at effluent, so we're making sure that there's not a lot of wastewater that's poured either into the surrounding environment through marine net pens or dumped out of a RAS system. We don't want to pollute the surrounding environment. And any of these other criteria, if you have questions on them, feel free to ask me. I'm not going to go through every single one. For our aquaculture standard and our fishery standard, you can find the whole write-up of every single criteria broken down, how our scientists rate it. So like how they find the geometric mean and how they get the final score. All of that information is public and on our website. And when you go on our website and you search the recommendations, there will be links to it from each recommendation, which I'll show you right here. Oh wait, I'll show you in the next one. So this is just a little bit about our assessment process. So each assessment takes up to 18 months. So it is a long, arduous process, but we think it's really well worth it because we're not an eco-certifying body. These are non-voluntary assessments. So we're assessing anything that is important on the US market, we're assessing it. You can't say no, basically. And we repeat our recommendations, or we repeat our assessments every 3 to 5 years to ensure that all of our ratings are up to date and accurate with what is currently going on in the aquaculture or fishery. Okay, so we have all of these recommendations, right? So as of December 2023, we have a total of 681 current assessments, so that aren't archived or that need to be updated. We have 681 that have resulted in a cumulative 5,711 recommendations that cover 431 species, okay? So you can find all of these 5,000 recommendations on our website using the recommendations search tool. So I've just taken a screenshot of some example guidance for you here. So what I did is I went through on seafood species, I searched for trout, but then you can also use some of these other filters. So we're talking about aquaculture today. So I said I only want to see farmed options. I only want to see stuff that's coming from the United States. So rainbow trout, very sustainable, great aquaculture production here in the United States, really good work happening. You can see that this particular system, so any rainbow trout from the United States using raceways and ponds, has been rated by Seafood Watch as green best choice. So if you're seeing farmed trout or steelhead, go ahead and buy it because it's a really, really sustainable choice. You can also search by best choice only. So you only want to see best choice or you only want to see good alternative. You can filter out for that as well. And you can look at the differences. So a lot of times people will use our search tool and there will be 20 different recommendations for one species. And that's because we're rating individually on each different farming method or each different fishing method. So if you're looking for albacore tuna, for example, there's a lot of red there. You're like, what's the difference between this red and this green? One option might be, oh, this one was caught on pole and line, so it's more sustainable because there's less bycatch. So then you know that if you're really dedicated to making sustainable choices and you're at the grocery store, you can ask that question. Hey, do you know how this tuna was caught? It's albacore. If it's pole and line, it's going to be a sustainable choice for me. So these pocket guides were just mentioned. These are kind of our legacy item. We're really proud of them. We know that paper is not the best option in terms of we've got 5,000 recommendations. How are you going to put them all in a paper pocket guide? But we're working on making some more digital options. So we still really like for people to use the pocket guides though, because they're really easy to put in your wallet and reference on the go. There are 10 versions. So there's national Spanish, there's West Coast Spanish, and there's also Southeast, Northeast, Southwest, Hawaii, sushi. There's 10 different versions, and they're curated for not only what is available in the region where you are. So, for example, in the Southeast guide, you might see on the green best choice column lionfish. There's no distribution for lionfish really for the rest of the country. So you're not going to see lionfish, even though it is really sustainable and we love to eat invasives. You're not going to see lionfish on the pocket guide for the West Coast because they are curated for not only what's available, but also what people are actively eating in those different regions of the country. So they're really valuable and really nice for on-the-go reference. If you're more if you're going to lose your paper guide, that's totally fine. All of them are on the website. So all of them can be downloaded, and there are digital versions for national and West Coast guides. And we're working on more versions of the guides to have a digital version as well. Oh, and then I did leave one thing out, which is that the guides are dated. So we update these guides every 6 months. If you have an old guide and you want a new one, reach out to us. We are happy to send guides all around the country. We don't want people to use outdated information. We work really hard to reassess all of the aquaculture procedure and fisheries so that you have the most up-to-date information. So if you have a really old dated pocket guide and you're hanging on to it, toss it. We'll get you a new one. We also have now consumer species guides, which we're really, really proud of. These are not printed. They're only going to be found on our website. So at the moment, we have 10 options, and these are really valuable because Americans really eat a pretty monotonous array of seafood. We're not eating heaps and heaps of different types of seafood on the daily basis. It's a lot of people that are like, I only eat shrimp and salmon and crab, and that's totally fine. You do you. So if you know that you're going to eat crab and shrimp and tuna when you're out, and that's really going to be your option, It's really valuable for folks to familiarize themselves with what the options are for their favorite seafood. So just knowing what you like and then familiarizing yourself with the sustainability of what you like is so valuable. So if you go to our website and then you go to the consumer guides page, that's where these are going to be. That's where you're going to find all of these. So essentially what they are is, say you click catfish, it's going to go through everything that you need to know just about catfish. So cutting through the noise of all the other species that you could potentially see at the grocery store or at a restaurant because you know that you like catfish, and that's fair enough. So here's some example guidance. So bivalves is pretty easy because it's really hard to make a bad choice when you're eating bivalves. So here's some example guidance. So you want to buy clams, cockles, mussels, oysters, and scallops that are farmed worldwide. They're all best choice. And then the only caveat there is that there's a good alternative rating for some sources of Pacific geoduck. So like now you know when you're out and about, I want to make a sustainable choice. I don't know where this salmon is from, but I do know they have bivalves. You know that the bivalves are going to be a great choice. So go for the scallops, go for the mussels. And these are also updated on a monthly basis. So as new recommendations come out, we go back in, we change the guidance if we need to, based on what the ratings say. So the other thing that you can do as a consumer is you can familiarize yourself with our partners. So we have over 80 partners. These are just a couple of examples that I wanted to showcase today. So these guys here, they have made a commitment to their procurement practices following Seafood Watch ratings. So if you're using subscription services like HelloFresh and Blue Apron, you know that the seafood that you're going to be getting in that box is going to be sustainable based on our sustainability criteria. Same with Whole Foods. Whole Foods uses our ratings for their wild caught product. They have a different sustainability criteria for their procurement on aquaculture. But anything that you find at Whole Foods, anything that's wild caught, it's going to be a green best choice or a yellow good alternative. So you really can't make a bad decision there, which is really nice because I know keeping up to date with everything that's going on in the seafood industry, understanding, I mean, there's 5,000 recommendations. That's a lot. And sometimes you're just exhausted. When I shop at Whole Foods for my seafood, I can relax kind of because I know that the onus isn't on me anymore. The onus is on the retailer because they've made this sustainable procurement policy, and I can just pick anything that they have because they've done the work, which is really nice. It is also important to note that we have all these partners that partner with us, but over 80% of retailers in the United States do have some sort of sustainable procurement practice in place for their seafood. Now, the legitimacy or the rigor of those policies, I can't speak to, but there are, over 80% of retailers do have some sort of policy in place. So people are hearing the demand for sustainable seafood and trying to make better choices when it comes to stocking seafood in their stores. So this is my last slide. I know I went really fast, but I wanted to save more time for like questions at the end. But what can you do to support sustainable seafood? Like I said, really important that you just familiarize yourself with what the options are, right? So knowing and being prepared when you're out at the grocery store or at a restaurant is half of the battle. The second thing that we really recommend to people is adding the Seafood Watch recommendations page to their home screen. So that recommendations page where you can search the over 5,000 recommendations, you can add that to your like home Safari on your phone so that when you open your browser, it just takes you straight there, do a quick search, understand what, and find the information that you need. And then the last thing that we ask people is to get loud. So asking your server or your fishmonger at the fish counter at your grocery store, do you sell sustainable seafood? It's actually extremely impactful, right? Even if the answer is, I don't know. The question really is more important than the answer when it comes to creating change, because our theory of change starts with the consumer. So it starts with consumers ask for sustainable seafood. Businesses take note of that and change their procurement practices. Their procurement practices influence the fishing industry, so fishers then begin to change. And then finally, we see change on a political scale where a policy gets involved. And that all starts with the consumer, and the consumer demanding a certain product because that's what they want, and that's what their values are. Overwhelmingly, we have found, based on some consumers or some studies in the business industry, that businesses, when they make changes to their procurement policy or their purchasing policy, it is overwhelmingly not because of margins or because of market research or because of pricing, really. It's because of anecdotal comments from their customers. So when you say, I really want to eat sustainable salmon, what do you have? That actually goes a long way and is so impactful. So we really encourage people. I know it's not the most fun thing to do to ask your server, oh, do you know where this is from? But it is a really impactful thing that you can do anytime you're out shopping or dining for seafood. It's just asking where it comes from and seeing if it's sustainable. And that is it for me. I've put my email down at the bottom there. My name's Tally again. If anyone has any questions, anyone wants to distribute guides, shoot me an email. Happy to hear from you. And hopefully I'll be able to help you out. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Tally. That was an excellent presentation, and I think it addressed a lot of the questions that we all have when we're trying to pick out our seafood and knowing how to do it in a sustainable way. I'll reiterate, too, that we have some guides that Tally sent to us. They're up on the front of the stage here, so as you make your way out, you're welcome to take some, and, of course, reach out to Tally if you have any questions. I think what we'll do is we'll hold questions until our panel. We'll be bringing Tally back in for that as well. So we can start our break just a couple of minutes early. So we have a break until 10:50. This is a good time for everyone to use the restrooms. I'll remind you that they're out and you make a left down the end of the hallway. You're welcome to step outside if you'd like. Just don't stray too far. We'll be back in about 15 to 20 minutes. We do have a boat tour that's departing right now from our main gallery, so just don't get in the mix of that group there. Do not board the boat. You are here for the aquaculture workshop. And with that, we can go ahead and take our break, and if you have any questions, just feel free to find me. So thank you again, and we'll start back again at 10:50.
more of a wild harvest if they're sending them over to France. But that is really goodness. Yeah, introducing species to take care of invasive species is always not a good idea.
It's amazing how many things now are published in more than one. I wish we did that.
There was a Latvia facility that's gone under, but it's going wrong.
Steps.
There was a Latvia facility that they grew too big too fast, but they had algal mat scrubbers as a big part of their water reuse. That wasn't their issue. The issue was trying to in a fillet market. They didn't go live, the live market route, and they just weren't able to cheap imports. But yeah, I toured their facility. It was really impressive with the algal mats.
When he communicates with us, via tries to use it, and it's amusing.
Love my Wisconsin walleyes.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, what are they changing?
A little bit of marketing there. Yeah, turned tilapia into cherry snapper in the early '70s. That was some of the inroads for tilapia. Was just amazing. Who wants to eat Patagonian toothfish? Nobody. Call it Chilean sea bass.
Everyone's fun. Right. What I used it, what my son did was selected to be one of the representatives from the University of Michigan. So we ended up coming to it was an American.
Special orders and say you got to be, be patient. You only get 3 pounds of Atlantic sapphire in every time, but you can order that. You can order something else. They're very accommodating.
Yeah, and they've done. You guys, the Harbor Branch has had that chef workshop. Oh, well, you guys. Workshops. The issue is with most of the guys. They personally, they don't have the time to know how. They're not graphic designers, right? So instead, they go to their association. So like the Aquaculture Association, national one, have done a lot of work in that area to encourage you to undertake, things. Well, sometimes
Especially for salmon, because they're proud of their wildlife.
Like this one says, wild cat.
So, yeah, so we will normally test water, but if there isn't enough,
They tried to
validate the science to the fund. Yeah. Right. How does it look around here?
Both European and American, North American fisheries, including Canada, they tested, and these fisheries were destroyed by the early 1990s. There were cosmos companies fighting for access to these things. Canada has pretty much
Okay, yeah.
the fishery. So that was
No, and my
yeah, in the avoid. For the most part, I think what you're finding public is fairly well vetted, and it's a fishery where they're watching the numbers very closely. They will close the fishery.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. That once that fishery reaches quotas, that fishery is done for the year. So
Yeah,
I
so
would
the main concern with, like the private oysters is
you can hear it in my nasal accent.
however, if you want to build a water garden, it's just filter water and you're not planning on using them, the regulations are different. Yeah, and my suggestion would be, if your county, board member doesn't have the right contact.
I grew up on 90-10 Western, so I'm a south sider. Sox grew up all my life.
Or, water garden program. I don't know if you're.
Very good. I'm never. My parents grew up in Blue Island and that area.
Well, my contact information is my business, so reach out to me and I'll put you in. Sound good? Of course. Yeah.
Bowen or
Oh, wonderful. Hey, you're right. biggest part of the curriculum build has been, okay, this is for everybody, regardless of if you're allowed to have, grass or not, and we want to give it the best opportunity. That being said, Florida Aquaculture Association and us at DAX are doing aquaculture educator workshop. It's going to be focused on educators teaching aquaculture or bringing it into the classroom. You don't have to currently be doing it. You have to be interested in talking to farmers. We're going to have a lot of farmers come in and also discuss resources that are available. It is April something, but if you go to the Florida Aquaculture Association website, sign up for it. It's funded. So we've got money for hotel and stuff like that, and it's actually going to be at IREC down the road in Fort Pierce. It's IREC. So if you're interested, come to that. You're going to learn a lot more. You can also reach out to me and we'll look at that curriculum.
That's what they mean. That's what's being found in Chile, being found in Scotland.
Right, yeah.
Get the sockeye.
Yeah, we shot some standard lists. So like that's the biggest thing we found to next admin is okay, which boxes does this check because you're required to teach. So we've got some of those
Cage farming in Atlanta,
and
Scotland, Chile, we had
around. I can be in direct contact with your admin to say we have more health programs. We have the farm that are really actually on the thing they use classroom, and that gives that extra, verification, right? You're validating by these. So I'm happy to help. Yeah, like I said, that's my bailiwick, that's my wheelhouse, that's my passion project. Is that capability? Yeah. Such a push, and I will say that in the last 2 years, there's been international from the technical side of things, and also in so Florida is one of the only states that has a so not just high schools, but they're actually starting the national FFA competition of aquaculture. Florida's running with that. They've been very excited. Our Florida Aquaculture Association, like you guys have started because our contest is missing for the rest of the country. So now they're trying to bring in other states. So it's definitely growing. The resources are out there, especially when it comes to FFA and ad programs. I can also put you in touch with other teachers.
It does. It's a different. Yes,
Robert,
it
it's
did.
so nice to talk to you.
Yeah, the feeds, the prepared feeds they use, they're not as heavy with the astaxanthin as some of the wild. I like the product. And so I'm on the fence. They have
Yeah, use your guide. I would say if you can. It's knowing
it's a game changer. Salmon is a game changer for summer.
I can, but I can tell you. So, but when I say all of this stuff, it does sound a little on the red list. Exactly. Yeah, and adding that and on that is
So we're going to actually have a presentation at March workshop, focusing on the state. I think you'll be excited to hear that story. So you'll be here on Monday. Okay. She's University of Chicago. She's a physician there.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started again. We are staying perfectly on time today. Most impressive. Thank you all for that. Give everyone just a moment to take their seats here. Okay, Well, great. Well, welcome back from our break. I hope you all enjoyed it. We're going to ease back into our sessions with a film, so a little bit different. And so this is a film and a filmmaker that we discovered last year. We attended an aquaculture seminar in Fort Lauderdale, and we met Sarah Curry. And she did such a great job presenting the videos that she makes, and we asked her if she would be interested in being a part of the series. So we're going to be showing several of her films throughout our workshops, and she's actually going to be here in person for our April workshop. So if you want to meet her, you can then. A little bit about her. Sarah founded Soraya Films in 2016 after moving to Florida in 2011. She was working with a small production company that was filming fish farm documentaries. She had the idea for a series called The Hunt for Sustainable Seafood after realizing how difficult it was to find local sustainable seafood in South Florida. The series is available online and on local PBS stations. And the film that we're going to watch now is called Chefs as Leaders in Sustainable Seafood, which follows along some Miami chefs as they embark on a journey to catch fish and host a sustainable seafood community dinner. So we'll play this film now, and again, you'll be able to meet Sarah at some of our upcoming workshops and find her films online. So, all right, Joey, thank you so much.
The ocean is an incredible place. Let's keep it that way. Join us as we hunt for sustainable seafood. Your seafood choices matter for the future of ocean health. Hey, it's Sarah Curry. In this episode, we're going fishing off the coast of Miami with 3 South Florida chefs, Chef Todd Erickson, Chef Alan Susser, and Chef Dean Max. We're catching fish for a sustainable seafood community dinner to help chefs and locals become more connected to their seafood.
So today was a great day on the water. You know, out here on Biscayne Bay and out in the Gulf Stream, it was beautiful weather. We do this sustainable seafood dinner twice a year. We had a goal to catch fish, a kind of purpose to catch a lot of fish, and we talked about sustainable seafood. We talked about some of the issues that we have individually, and we talked about some of the industry-wide and some of the things that we face with fresh fish, with the demand for fresh fish. So I think having that conversation with chefs who are very influential with what they're buying and what they're using in their restaurants and what they talk to their customers about.
Chefs are in a unique position to help drive sustainability forward, especially since some of us only eat seafood when we're out at restaurants.
I've actually been working with Captain Mike for about 3-4 years now. He really knows the boat, he knows the water, he knows what to look for to find fish. When I first started with him, I thought you just like throw the line in the water and you pull out fish. There's so many different factors about catching fish or fishing for fish.
I'm chasing them out left here.
Captain Mike knows to look at the birds, to look what's floating, to look at the spray of the bait fish, how to get the bait fish, all of the little intricacies of fishing. We tried some top, did some wreck.
Coming back to you, straight right.
We tried some deep water, deep sea. We did some trolling. So we did 4 or 5 different methods of fishing. We start off, we've got a tuna, black tuna, small kind of football-shaped tuna, real nice flesh. Then also got a rainbow runner, which is actually a nice sized rainbow runner. Fleshy, kind of pink flesh, but really good eating. I was really happy to get that.
Rainbow runners are prized among recreational fishermen and can be caught as bycatch in the tuna fisheries. But there isn't a commercial fishery that specifically targets them here in the U.S.
We got a couple mackerels, and then we have the classic fisherman story. The one that got away, that was like this big, the wahoo. It's all part of the story of fishing. Beautiful fish that got away, wish we could have, all the errors that, happen, we relive it, And that's kind of part of the memorable part of going fishing and having a fish story to tell. But we didn't really catch a whole lot of fish. I mean, regretfully, I really thought that we would catch a lot more. Whether we catch or not, I think a lot of the story is that you don't always catch what you intend to.
We caught 2 big fish that we didn't keep. Barracuda pose the risk of ciguatera poisoning. Tropical fish that are high in the food chain, like barracuda, can bioaccumulate toxins from fish they've eaten. The toxin is actually from a marine algae that many smaller fish consume. These toxins are harmless to fish, but can make us sick.
You kind of learn some of the difficulties that fishermen go through, some of the things of Mother Nature, and going fishing is not like harvesting. As chefs, we think, well, we'll go fishing, we'll catch a lot of fish, and we'll have a big fish party. It's not always so, and this trip it was not so.
On a global scale, half of the seafood we eat is farmed. And here in the US, the majority of seafood we eat is imported. Luckily, Captain Mike went fishing the next day and was able to catch a few more fish for our seafood dinner. At the Sustainable Seafood Dinner, Chef Alan also launched his new book that highlights lionfish, a very sustainable option here in South Florida. And all the appetizers at the event were made from lionfish, both ceviche and lionfish tacos.
What I want to do with this dinner is to involve you so that you become ambassadors for sustainable seafood as well as the chefs. And so with that, we were fishing yesterday out in the Gulf.
Yesterday on the fishing trip, we caught some rainbow runner, black tuna, 2 fish that are kind of nice top swimming fish around our area here. And they're kind of interesting because they're fish that you don't see in a lot of restaurants because they don't last very long. They kind of spoil really quick. We just caught them yesterday, so they're gonna be beautiful. So I'll do a crudo with those tonight. So the blackfin and the rainbow runner, they're both really clean eating, and they're best when they're kind of raw, because when you cook them, they get a little bit sharper, more fishy flavor. So we're gonna leave those raw, they'll be super sweet like that. And then I'm just gonna use winter citrus right now. So oranges and grapefruit and ginger and turmeric. I made a beautiful reduction from all that, and that'll be the sauce. I love that connection with, being able to harvest something from the ocean and respecting that in the process and understanding what goes behind it.
These dinners are something that is absolutely a part of it, and we're doing another dinner like this.
I've been a chef for 18 years now. This is my first fish event with Chef Alan, but I do vegan events with him once a year in St. Lucia. Going fishing yesterday, I think my favorite part was just really getting to know the chefs better. Just being out on a day that was that spectacular, like it was so perfect, and just pulling in fish.
Well, at least we're getting a variety.
Seeing how fast the deckhand was too, like he was on it.
Sustainable seafood is important to me.
It's been important in all of the restaurants that I've opened.
I want to leave something for the next generation, and it seems like every day there's another news story of something going extinct, or it gets kind of grim. And to know that myself as a chef, that I can have an impact.
The story behind the fish, I think it does affect taste because in our minds it becomes more memorable. By being more memorable, it affects our perception of it for not only for us fishing, but also for our guests coming to it. And they want to know what that's about. The passion of it for a chef and a passion for people who love to eat good food want to be connected to what they're eating. It's not just blindly putting food in their mouth and not understanding the culture, the story, the history. That really affects. And I think it's a great thing to bring to the table. It's not just feeding us as energy, but it's the joy of eating and the joy of getting the food. And it makes a difference in the day. And that's kind of what food is all about.
It's more important than ever to support local chefs and restaurants when you can. And if you live by the water, Learn about what fish are in season. Visit SorayaFilms.org to find out where to eat these chefs' food. Thanks for joining us as we continue our hunt for sustainable seafood. Here's what we'll be talking about on the next episode.
People think that spearfishers are just down there to shoot anything that passes, but it's really not that way. It's super selective. If you're blue water hunting, if you're hunting on a reef or a wreck, it's very different.
Joy flips on the mic. Perfect, sweet. Big thanks to Sarah for putting those films together. As you saw, it's part of a series, so if you want to watch them on your own and learn more about some of these different groups that are catching and growing seafood around Florida, please do, and we'll be showing a few in our future workshops. So is anybody hungry for seafood right now? Katrina had a picture of shrimp that now my stomach is just rumbling so much because I want shrimp. So our next presenter is Laura Isaac Norton. She is a member of our outreach team here at FAU Harbor Branch, and she is going to present her talk on why eat seafood, which I don't know if we need to convince you at this point. We're probably also hungry for it. But she'll teach you how to also pick it out in stores and why it's so important for our health. So with that, Laura.
Hello. So if you aren't already hungry, I'm afraid the pictures in my presentation might make you hungry. So I'm sorry in advance, but this is the last talk before our panel, and then you are free to go and eat some seafood for lunch. I'm sure everybody has a personal reason why they eat seafood. I'm sure lots of people who probably aren't in this room have reasons why they don't want to eat seafood. So if you don't have an answer to this question in your head already, I hope to help you find one in the next 30 minutes. You'd think I haven't done this before, but I have. Okay. I'm Laura. Gabby introduced me already. I identify as a seafood lover like most of you guys. I am enthusiastic about nutrition and how food supports our body. And I am an advocate for aquaculture, especially sustainable aquaculture. But notice, none of those three things say that I am a doctor, a registered dietitian, or somebody who is licensed to give medical advice. So please take all of this with a grain of salt. Please, if there's anything that I say today that makes you interested in how some of this information can play into your personal, healthy life goals, please go and talk to your healthcare provider or your registered dietitian. So this morning, I'm going to be breaking my talk into 3 different parts, and I'm going to have labels on the screen so you can keep track of where we are. So first, we're going to talk about the superfood of the sea. Then we're going to talk about deciphering confusing messaging. And finally, we're going to talk about selecting seafood with confidence. So, the superfood of the sea. Oxford Dictionary describes superfood as a nutrient-rich food considered to be especially beneficial for our health and well-being. Now, this is a marketing term. This is not a term that doctors normally use. Doctors, dietitians, food scientists will rarely use the word superfood, but it's just a silly word that I put onto the screen to help bring attention to the nutrients and health benefits that seafood have. So, everybody can benefit from including seafood in our diet. I think you can tell that all the presenters today have been really enthusiastic about seafood, and especially sustainable seafood, whether that's fished or farmed. So I'm here to tell you we should be putting that food into our daily and weekly diet choices. About 90% of Americans don't consume enough seafood, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. And fatty fish significantly lowers the risk of heart disease mortality. That's according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the World Health Organization. So it has some pretty impactful benefits. So let's talk about the nutrients that seafood has in it. An essential vitamin, mineral, or nutrient is something that we can only get from our diet because our bodies can't make those nutrients ourselves. They're really important for proper body function. So seafood often contains vitamin D, vitamin B6, and vitamin 12. You're probably thinking, hey, Laura, I know that if I go out into the sun, my body makes vitamin D, and that is true. But depending on our age, the color of our skin, and how long we're in the sun, it might not be enough for what your body needs on a daily basis. So other than these essential vitamins, there's also essential minerals that we can glean from seafood, including phosphorus, magnesium, zinc, iodine, calcium, iron, copper, potassium, and selenium. And then there's also essential nutrients, including choline and omega-3 fatty acids. Remember that one? We're going to come back to it. So because there are so many different nutrients that you're seeing here, keep in mind that depending on the seafood that you eat, depends on the type of nutrients that you're going to find in your seafood. And because of this, it's recommended that you add a large variety of seafood into your diet to make sure that you can get all of these nutrients. Something that's not essential, but very important, is an incredibly powerful antioxidant called astaxanthin. It's one of the most powerful antioxidants available for us to consume, and it's a carotenoid or a red pigment that is often found in red-colored seafood, including salmon and shrimp. So if you're interested in astaxanthin, you can do a lot more research on it, but it's extremely powerful, and antioxidants help keep our bodies clean and free of free radicals, which can lead to cancer in the future. So I just listed off a whole bunch of nutrients, but you're probably thinking, how do those nutrients affect me? Well, I'm going to tell you. They support our healthy bodies. They support our brain and our mental health. They support our skin, our bones and our teeth, our energy levels and our immune system, our thyroid and our endocrine system, our muscles, our heart, blood, and our blood circulation. These nutrients also support our livers, our wound healing, how quickly we heal after an injury, also DNA and RNA formation and the protection of that, and finally digestion. So most things that our bodies need to do to function, nutrients from seafood can help support. So remember, I talked about omega-3 fatty acids. We're going to talk about those for a little bit. So these are healthy polyunsaturated fats. They're very important. They are essential nutrients that we can only gain through food, and we can't survive without them. So there's 3 different types of omega-3 fatty acids. I'm going to get a little scientific with you guys. So they have very long chemical names. I'm going to call them by their nicknames, EPA, DHA, and ALA. So this is the chemical structures that they have. All of these come from plants. So you can find EPA and DHA in seafood because they eat food that eat algae. Algae is a marine plant. It's very high in omega-3 fatty acids. ALA come from terrestrial plants. Some foods that we're familiar with that are really high in ALA omega-3s are flaxseed, avocado, walnuts, and those are soybeans. Our bodies can easily digest EPA and DHA. ALA, it's a little bit harder. Our bodies have to convert ALA into EPA or DHA before we can absorb it and use it for what our bodies need. We call EPA and DHA bioavailable. These are substances that are easily able to be absorbed into our bodies and used for their intended purpose without having to alter them first. So omega-3 fatty acids, in addition to all the benefits that the other nutrients in seafoods offer, omega-3s specifically support our brain health, our eyes, our heart, our liver, our skin, the cell walls and all the cells in our body. They also support our immune system and our endocrine and our lymphatic system. So I talked about a lot of nutrients. I touched on that depending on the type of seafood you eat, it can depend on what nutrients you're gleaning from it. But it's not just the type of seafood, it's also where that seafood was living, so the habitat type, whether it was living out in the wild, whether it was living on a farm, whether it was living in warm water or cold water, etc. What kind of diet it was eating can really depend on the amount of nutrients it has, just like us, and also the cooking method. So briefly, I'm going to touch on the cooking methods of seafood. Because these different nutrients that seafood have in them can sometimes be broken down by high heat, the way that we cook them really does impact how much of those nutrients that we absorb after we eat it. So if your seafood is being handled properly and stored properly, eating it raw is a great way to get quite a bit of nutrients, such as sushi. But then also more gentler ways of cooking seafood include grilling, poaching or steaming, or even broiling. But frying seafood includes putting the fish fillet in a high fat bath where it's undergoing high heat exposure for quite a while. And that leads to the breakdown of these important fatty acids, and then our bodies can't absorb them. So that is not as great of a choice for cooking if you're trying to get as many nutrients out of that seafood as possible. So let's compare seafood as a protein source versus other protein that you all probably eat on a weekly basis. So here you can see that I am comparing 4 different types of protein. The first one is a seafood, salmon. I'm sure we're all familiar with salmon. I'm also comparing tofu. If you remember, that was a product, a soy product that I mentioned had a lot of ALA, omega-3 fatty acids in it. Also lean beef, so 90-10, and then chicken breast. So let's look at the protein content. Salmon has about 25 grams of protein, which is comparable to lean beef and chicken breast. It has less than a gram of saturated fat per serving, which is pretty low. So compared to these numbers, you can see that salmon is a lean protein option. Now let's look at omega-3 fatty acids. Salmon has quite a bit of omega-3s in it. The recommended daily amount is around 500 milligrams per person per day. So you can see that the amount of omega-3 in just one portion really blows that out of the water. B vitamins. These are really important. There's a lot of different types of B vitamins. Salmon has 50% of the recommended daily amount of vitamin B2, 3, 5, and 6, and 100% of the recommended daily amount of vitamin B12. The recommended daily amount of iodine is about 150 nanograms, or micrograms, and salmon provides you about 30% of this. So it's a highly nutritious food. I'm not saying it's better or worse than the other options up here. I just wanted to give you a visual representation to see how it lines up. Can you okay. Didn't know if my microphone went out. So we made it through the first section. Section number 2, deciphering confusing messaging. So we've talked about the health benefits of seafood, and now I want to talk about 3 things that make people question the health and safety of consuming seafood. You guys have probably heard about these before. They're a little scary, but we're going to get through it together. They include mercury, dioxins, and antibiotics. So how many of you guys have read headlines or statements about one of these 3 things that have made you personally question the health or safety of eating seafood? That's what I thought. I have 2. I'm not going to lie. So that's why I did a little research to share with you guys. So I'm going to do my best to share what I've learned with you guys so that you can a little bit more confidently make these decisions. All right, so we're going to start with the scariest one. We're starting with mercury. We're going to power through, and then we'll move on. So I'm sure you've heard and read, and you've even probably talked with your friends about mercury warnings in seafood. So let's talk about the facts. Mercury is a naturally occurring element. It's on our periodic table. It's naturally in the environment. But human activities, such as industrial burning, can lead to increased levels of mercury, especially in coastal areas. Once mercury finds itself in an aquatic environment, it interacts with the bacteria and is transformed into something called methyl mercury. That is a bit more toxic to humans than elemental mercury. Most types of seafood have a very small amount of methylmercury in their system. It's just how it is. In humans, high methylmercury levels, either from one large exposure event or small bits of exposure over long periods of time, can lead to health problems. Some thermometers, electrical switches, light bulbs, batteries, lab chemicals, old antiseptics, and fumes from burning coal are sources of mercury exposure. So methylmercury bioaccumulates in seafood. This means that over long periods of time, methylmercury will build up in the tissues of seafood. It also biomagnifies, which means as you go higher up in the food web, as you can see here, methylmercury also accumulates. So apex predators, such as sharks, like you see, are known to have high levels of mercury in their body. Frequently eating large amounts of seafood that have high methylmercury content could lead to methylmercury poisoning. But there is quite a bit of misleading information out there. Let's see. If you look at this picture right here that says symptoms of mercury poisoning, if you're like me, you probably look at that picture and you think, mercury poisoning, I see shrimp, I see clams, I see mussels. So based on this advertisement, if I eat one of those three animals, I am probably going to be at risk for mercury poisoning, and therefore I should not eat these fish. That is rational, but because of the marketing that's done here, but that's not quite true. So in reality, it's highly unlikely to get mercury poisoning from these foods because these animals are low on the food web, low on the food chain. So mercury is not able to bioaccumulate and biomagnify the same way as it would in an apex predator. These animals also grow very quickly. Depending on the species that you see here, it takes between 5 months and 2 years for these animals to get to market size, so they're fast growers. That's quite a bit different than sharks, which can live for decades and have quite a bit more time to have that mercury accumulate in their system. In fact, the USDA, the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, and the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, list shrimp, mussels, and clams as low mercury seafood options. Many agencies worldwide have commented on the health benefits of seafood. In most cases with an asterisk, these benefits outweigh the possible risk of consuming methylmercury. The exceptions to this are if you are pregnant, may become pregnant nursing, or if you are a young child, or if you happen to be eating seafood regularly that is high in methylmercury for extended periods of time. So this figure was created by the FDA, the EPA, and the USDA, specifically for women who may become pregnant, who are nursing, or for small children. But I think it's also really interesting for us to see, since they have boiled it down really easily to show you what are seafood options that have high mercury levels in them and seafood options that don't. This was created in 2021, and it doesn't show all of the fish species out there that we could eat, but it does show quite a few that Americans popularly eat. So fish, if you can see this, I'll highlight it for you. Fish that are high in methylmercury that we should avoid include king mackerel, shark, swordfish, and tilefish. So that's what this is here. Notice under avoid, big-eye tuna is also listed, but all other tuna varieties are listed under a good choice or a best choice. Other good choices include cod, salmon, oysters, lobsters, shrimp, tilapia, tuna, grouper, mahi, sheep's head, snapper, and most other tuna varieties. So this is a really interesting, really helpful resource if you are being conscious about the mercury levels in your seafood. So this guide offers general information, but what about our local seafood? Local guidelines and advisories can be found on the Florida Health Department's Fish Advisory website, which is right here. Feel free to take a picture of it if you'd like. This is a screenshot from their Fish Advisory website, and they are working together with the Department of Environmental Protection, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, all to test local seafood for contaminants that might be a public safety concern. Here are some of the current advisories for coastal waters in Florida, excluding the Keys and surrounding areas. And you can see that they also provide a serving recommendation based on what pertains to you and the amount of mercury found. So this is helpful. I recommend you guys look at the fish advisory website on the Department of Health's website and just become familiar with it as things change. Okay, we got through mercury, now for dioxins. So what are dioxins? If you all are like me, you probably didn't know much about them other than that they sound like toxin, and that's not good. So dioxins are highly toxic and persistent environmental pollutants. That means they hang around for a long time. And they're part of a larger group of chemicals called polychlorinated diobenzo P-dioxins and polychlorinated dibenzofluorants. They bioaccumulate similar to mercury, and they are stored in fat. So they can be found in the fat of meats, dairy products, and seafood. Prolonged exposure can cause health issues, but it seems that these compounds may affect different species differently. So what I'm saying is if they are doing research and testing dioxins on a lab rat or a different species, it might affect humans or dogs or any other species differently. There's still some research going on. During a review that was done by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the World Health Organization, they found insufficient evidence that the typical levels of dioxin found in fish could create cancer in humans. They did see that about 10% of human exposure is from the environment and 90% is from our food. So you can see that this is kind of confusing. So the best information that I have, the best advice I have for you is to stay informed with local advisories on the safety of recreationally caught seafood. But scientists are looking more into dioxins, how they can affect human health. The current advisories are that it doesn't seem that this could affect human health as much as we might fear. So now on to antibiotics. I'm going to touch on this. I'm sure that it will be talked about more next month when we talk about finfish aquaculture. So most production facilities use antibiotics in their animals. In early aquaculture days, quite a while ago, there was some widespread antibiotic use. But today, the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Human Health Services, so lots of different agencies, are working together to create and enforce regulations on domestic and imported seafood. So right now, no preventative antibiotics are allowed in aquaculture. This means that they cannot give antibiotics to healthy animals just in case they may get sick in the future. Therapeutic antibiotic use is allowed, and that means that they are using antibiotics when there is a targeted outbreak and targeted infection, and they're using the correct medication to treat that. In addition, no human antibiotics are allowed to be used. This helps prevent drug resistance, and all antibiotics used on the fish have to be approved by the FDA. Any seafood that is treated with antibiotics in the U.S. must complete a withdrawal period before harvest. That period changes based on the temperature of the water, the drug that was used, etc. And now, prebiotic treatments are becoming more popular to help boost farm seafood immune system. So by giving them some nutrient-rich food to help build up their immune system strong, the theory is that they will not be attacked by as many infections in the future. So, just like humans. Let's see. So imported seafood that we get from other countries, they are tested by the FDA for compliance to the U.S. seafood safety requirements, which does mention antibiotic use. Okay. So uncertainty around mercury, dioxins, and antibiotics may have led you to ask, how much seafood should we eat? Like, what is too much? What's not enough? It seems like I've talked about the really good and the really bad. So where do we meet in the middle? So first, 80% of America, or 80 to 90% of Americans aren't eating enough seafood. I already mentioned that. There is a review called the let's see, what did I write down? The Dietary Guidelines for Americans that helps us answer this question. If you look here at this graph on the left side of, or the right side, sorry, of my PowerPoint slide, you'll see that there's some blue-green dots above a bunch of purple dots. This graph is showing the recommended intakes of seafood versus what the actual average consumption is in the U.S. The y-axis, the vertical one, is showing us ounces of seafood to be consumed a week, and the x-axis, the horizontal one, is showing us age groups and then males and females within that age group. So all this is saying, in general, is from ages 9 to 60 plus, no matter if it's a male or a female, the recommended seafood intake is quite a bit higher than what the actual American seafood intake is. So don't be afraid to eat seafood. The general public over the age of 2 are recommended to eat between 4 and 17 ounces of seafood a week by the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. 8 to 10 ounces a week is a good guideline, a good range to try and target. And of course, this could change based on your specific health journey. Women who may become pregnant, who are nursing, or small children should still consume 8 to 12 ounces of seafood a week that is lower in mercury, according to the Dietary Health Guidelines for America and the EPA and the FDA. So that was the chart that I showed you earlier. So there is quite a bit of data that talks about how low seafood consumption could be harmful to our health because we will be missing those essential nutrients that I talked about earlier. There is more information on that than there is about the risk of consuming too much seafood. And you can consume more seafood than what's mentioned here, the 17 ounces a week, safely if you are taking notice of those low methylmercury options. Okay, so finally, what we've all been waiting for, maybe, is selecting seafood with confidence. So you guys have learned so much about sustainable seafood, so much about Florida aquaculture, so much about what seafood can do for your health. So hopefully you guys are now ripping and roaring to go to the store and find some seafood. But how do you know if it's good? How do you know if it's sustainable? How do you know if it's fresh when you're standing there in the aisle? I'm going to try and tell you today. So, when you look at a package of seafood, there's a lot of labels, a lot of certifications, a lot of acronyms, and nowhere on the package does it describe what those mean. So I'm going to do that for you today so that you know what you're looking at when you're going into the store. So when I first noticed these logos, I wondered what significance they had and how this product got a certification. Like, can a fish stick company just make up that they're sustainable and put that logo on their packaging, or do they have to go through a certification process? I had so many questions. So these certifications are actually created to help customers like us find seafood options that support sustainable farms and fisheries. They are all third party, so the company themselves are not certifying themselves. And, and that means that we can be a little bit more confident when we see these logos on seafood. So the first two certifications you see up here on the screen, these are specifically for aquacultured or for farmed seafood. This first one, the BAP, stands for Best Aquaculture Practices. This one I see pretty frequently here in Florida. They ensure that aquaculture is done responsibly through its worldwide certification program. They investigate every step of the culture process and to ensure it's safe, ethical, and responsible. So that's Best Aquaculture Practices. The next one is Aquaculture Stewardship Council. This is a British nonprofit program to transform seafood farming globally and to promote the best environmental and social aquaculture performance towards environmentally sustainable and social responsibility. So those two for aquaculture. This next group are for wild-caught fish. So MSC, this is also a really popular one that you'll probably see if you'll go into the grocery store today. That's the Marine Stewardship Council. That's the one here on the bottom left. That is an international nonprofit for wild-caught seafood. They ensure that seafood is fished sustainably. They aim to support healthy oceans, lakes, and rivers, protect food security, and to preserve the livelihoods of the fishers themselves. RFM stands for Responsible Fisheries Management. That's the middle logo at the bottom. And buying seafood with this logo gives you assurance that responsible seafood sourcing practices and source of origin. Typically, you're going to see this label on food that was fished in Alaska. And finally, we have our Dolphin Safe badge. I'm sure if you have bought tuna, you've seen a Dolphin Safe logo. This one here is dished out by the U.S. Department of Commerce. And in order to qualify as a Dolphin Safe company, the U.S. Department of Commerce requires a written statement from the captain of the vessel that's doing the fishing. In most fisheries worldwide, certifying that no purse seine net or other fishing gear was intentionally deployed or used to encircle dolphins during the fishing trip in which the tuna were caught. And that no dolphins were killed during the fishing or by the fishing practices. So captains also must complete a training course on how to fish for tuna in a dolphin-safe way. The last certification that you can see here, these are for fished and farmed products. Fair Trade Certified. So this is a North American nonprofit building an innovative model of responsible business, conscious consumerism, and shared value to eliminate poverty and enable sustainable development for farmers, workers, their families, and communities around the world. So if you see fair trade, that's what that means. Fresh from Florida, that's an easy one. That means that it came from Florida. This is not a third-party certification, but it's a recognition that's given by the Florida Department of Agriculture Consumer Services so that we know where our local seafood is. And then Friends of the Sea. This is an interesting one. It started as a Dolphin Safe certification in 2008, but they have expanded quite a bit. And now they are certifying any kind of product that has some sort of respect to the marine environment. This includes aquaculture, fisheries, fish meal, omega-3 fish oil supplements, whale watching and dolphin watching trips, aquariums, ornamental fish, and even sunscreens. So they're governed by World Sustainability Organization, which is an international non-governmental organization. So take a picture of these so that you know, you can help you remember when you're out in the store what all these mean. So now that you know what all the little logos and all the acronyms mean, now I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but not all seafood has a nutrition label. That's because raw fish is exempt from requiring a nutrition label, but as soon as an ingredient is added to that seafood product, you must have a nutrition label. So this is a label from albacore tuna. The only ingredient that was added is salt, so it has to have a label. So currently, this changes from time to time. Our nutrition labels are required to show, the serving size in ounces, the calories, the total fat, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates, protein, the vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. So that's only 4 vitamins and minerals. We talked about before that seafood has a whole lot of different essential nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that it has in them. So just keep in mind when you're looking at seafood products that have nutrition labels on them, that it might not be listing all the health benefits that you're getting from that product. Okay. So this packaging here, as you can see at the very bottom, does note that the omega-3 content in this tuna, but that's not required. So this is just an extra tidbit that they gave to us. What is required is something called the Country of Origin label. These are required by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. Retailers must provide these for all seafood, whether it has a nutrition label or not. So if you're at the fish market and they don't have the fish labeled with where it came from, ask them because they're required to know and have that shown. So here's some examples of seafood bought in different ways. And I'm just going to show you where that country of origin label can be found, because it's not the same on every type. So here we have some salmon. If you look really close, you can see that that says Blue House Salmon. That's from Blue Sapphire. They're going to come and talk to us soon. We're really excited about that. So right here it says USA raised. So that's easy. We know where that came from. It also says fresh from Florida. So we know that that is a USA, Florida fillet of salmon. Next we have tuna. It just says tuna small. So that is a little difficult to know what variety it is. But if you look here, it says it's a product of Costa Rica. So that's where the country of origin label is there. Next, we have 2 packaged salmon fillets. And it says right on the front of the label that one was farmed in Norway and one was caught in Alaska. And then if you purchase canned or packaged seafood products, likely the country of origin label is going to be printed right here on the top of the can. This says a product of Fiji. So we've got a lot of things that we've learned. Now we know what to expect on labels and what not to expect. I want to spend my last few moments with you guys talking about some different scenarios. So very quickly, we'll go through these. So this is a package of shrimp that I found at a store. It has a marinade, so a nutrition label is required. The marinade adds saturated fat and cholesterol, but the shrimp are very high in protein. And the packaging states right here that this shrimp is from Argentina. The USDA, FDA, and EPA list shrimp as a low methyl mercury product. We already talked about that. So I go to Seafood Watch, my trusty friend, and I want to see if shrimp from Argentina are sustainable. They list them as a species to avoid, so I passed on this one. So scenario number 2, I'm at Aldi. I'm buying some tuna. This tuna is in a marinade as well, so it has a nutrition label. It is certified by the Marine Stewardship Council, so that's a good sign. The marinade adds some sodium and sugars, but tuna is low in fat and high in protein, and the amount of sugar that it adds is fairly minimal, so that's another good sign. Right here, you can see that the packaging states that the product is from Thailand / the Pacific Ocean, and that it was caught with a pole and line, so good things. So I know that the USDA, FDA, and EPA list light tuna as a lower methyl mercury product, so I'm liking what I see. So I go back to Seafood Watch and I search for light tuna that was caught with a pole and line in the Pacific, and it lists it as a best choice. So this one came home with us. All right, scenario 3. Told you I was going to go fast. We're back here to the salmon. So there was no nutrition label on these that was required because there was no added product. I got these from Trader Joe's. We don't have one locally, but they're in Orlando, West Palm, Jacksonville. And they did add a nutrition label because they wanted to, but that wasn't required. These are both salmon. They're 2 different types of salmon, and you can see there's a big color difference. The top one is farmed. It's from Norway. And the bottom one is a wild-caught sockeye salmon from Alaska. So Atlantic salmon, sockeye salmon. Sockeye is normally more red like this. My immediate reaction was to be gravitating towards the sockeye salmon because I remember the astaxanthin antioxidants we talked about, and the bright red color. I'm like, ooh, that looks like a really healthy piece of fish. So we already talked about the country of origin labels for both of these. One's from Norway, one's from Alaska. I know that our trusty sources, USDA, FDA, and EPA, list them as low methyl mercury products, so that was great. I go to Seafood Watch, and I know that Norway has a history of a really wonderful farming history, but right now Seafood Watch has listed farmed salmon in Norway as a good alternative or avoid based on where in Norway it was farmed. Sockeye salmon is also listed as a good alternative. So I had to kind of weigh the pros and cons with this one. Okay, the last scenario is we went to a restaurant. We're treating ourselves. And we see that pompano is a special on the dinner menu. I don't know if you guys have gotten to try pompano, but it is delicious. So I got really excited when I saw pompano, and I said, okay, tell me more. I asked the wait staff, the horrible question is, can you please tell me where my seafood is coming from? They came back and they said, this is Florida fresh. So I got very excited. I know based on the Florida Health Department website that pompano is a low methylmercury option. It's not one of the species listed on that handy dandy table that I showed you earlier, since it's not as popular of a seafood choice for most Americans. I go on to Seafood Watch, and they list U.S. farm pompano as a best choice. So this was a wonderful dinner. So next to last slide here, if you're going to the store and selecting your seafood, look for these things. If you're buying a whole fish, you want the gills to be bright red. You want the eyes to be clear, not cloudy. You want the skin to be shiny, not dull. If you press on the fish skin, you want it to bounce back, to spring back, and not stay indented. These are all signs of a fresh fish, and you don't want to take home anything that's already spoiled. Here you can see 2 cuts of salmon. One's labeled good and one is bad. The bad salmon cut is a little bit more gray. If you are selecting fresh seafood and it's a little gray tinge, that means that it's probably old and you're not going to want to eat it. If you're choosing clams or mussels, if you're buying them fresh, you want to make sure that before they're cooked, they're on a thick bed of ice, just like all your seafood should be. It should always be on a thick bed of ice that's not melting. The shells should be closed before you cook them. Do not buy any ones that are open. And once you cook them, the shells should open. And if they don't open, throw them away. If you're buying crustaceans like lobsters or crabs, make sure their legs are moving, because these seafood can spoil really quickly. So you want to make sure that they're fresh when you're purchasing them. When in doubt, trust your nose. Fresh seafood should not have a really rancid or fishy smell, and they also should not taste fishy. If you're being served fish that has a fishy smell, that likely means it's gone bad. Once you bring home your seafood, store it in the fridge if you're going to use it within 2 days. If you're going to save it for longer, wrap it tightly and put it in the freezer. So finally, why eat seafood? It's incredibly important for our health. Most Americans aren't eating enough seafood, and the lack of key nutrients that this could cause can lead to health problems. Knowing, although that there are contaminants in our world, that's just a reality. Knowing how they get into our seafood and how to avoid them can keep us safe. There are agencies that are doing their best to certify and acknowledge groups that are farming and catching seafood sustainably. And now that you know how to read seafood labels and how to use the information and reference guidance from Seafood Watch, USDA, FDA, and EPA, and the Florida Health Department, you can feel confident in your seafood selections. So thank you all very much. So I think our presenters can go ahead and come up here to the table here, and we'll start our panel Q&A that will be hosted by Gabby.
Test, test. All right, awesome. So let's invite, well, first let's thank Laura. That was excellent. You answered a lot of questions. I think my favorite part was the scenarios at the end. That was really cool. It was a great way to wrap up everything we learned into, okay, now what do I do? And how do I get this food? So really great. We've invited our panel back up to the stage, and we have Tally zooming in on the screen. Tally, can you hear us? Yay. Oh, awesome. Give us a thumbs up if you have audio. Okay, excellent. Great. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to be emceeing our panel discussion. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'm going to come over to you, and either I can hand you the microphone and you can talk into there, or if you want to ask your question, I'll repeat it. And the reason for that is that we're recording these sessions, so we want to make sure that everything gets on the recording. If the question lends directly toward one of our presenters, I may turn to them and ask them to speak first. If one of you guys really want to answer a question first, maybe just give me a nod or something, and I'll go to you. I have a question, actually, not a planted question, a genuine question, and it's for you, Katrina. Who is #1 in alligator production in the United States, if not Florida? Louisiana. Okay, that was.
I know everybody's really shocked by that answer. But
Yes. Okay, awesome. All right, so that's my icebreaker question. I actually wanted to know. Who has a question? Anyone? All right, great. And I guess I should state, if you have a question for someone specific, you can go ahead and just say, this question is for you. I'll hand you the mic.
Do you know what region of Norway is the not good farm-raised fish?
So, hopefully you can hear me. I'm a little quiet.
In particular, that cut of from Trader Joe's.
Yeah. So that's a great question, because my first reaction was, oh, I've looked up Norwegian farmed salmon before, and it was a great choice listed on Seafood Watch, which is a really great resource. Like Tally mentioned, this actually may have been a better question for you, Tally. Sorry. They have reviewed hundreds and thousands of different individual farms. Oh, sorry, Joey. They've reviewed lots of different farms, and so if you go onto Seafood Watch's website and just look up salmon from Norway, it will tell you exactly which regions, which farms are okay, and maybe ones to pass for now. The challenge is then knowing where your salmon came from. So sometimes that's listed on the packaging. Sometimes there's like a QR code and a website that will take you to tell you exactly where that fish came from. But not every farm does that. Not every supplier does that. It just depends on their choices. So as long as the country is listed, I think that's all that's required.
Thank you. And the other question is, I've read over the years that tilapia is one of the most toxic fish.
Can I take this?
Yes, please take it.
Farm raised in particular.
Yeah. So I'm going to take this one because I have a very specific example that happened. So our director was actually at the state fair with a demo of an aquaponics system with some tilapia in it, and someone approached her and asked her where the chickens were. To which she responded, well, this is an aquaponics system. We don't have chickens in this system. Well, I thought tilapia eat chicken waste. I just thought they put tilapia over top and they just fed the tilapia chicken poop. I can tell you right now that's not how we raise tilapia. As someone came up to me earlier and we had this conversation, I just want to reiterate, it's really important to know where your seafood comes from, right? So I can't make a blanket statement for the world. I can't even make a blanket statement for the United States. But I can tell you in Florida, our practices allow us to raise products that aren't at those toxic levels. And there is a lot of information out there about tilapia because it is one of the most common species that get that misinformation side of things, especially as it is a Florida or United States product. So there is a lot of research that has been done into that and making sure that the product that you're getting is safe. Most of the concern is the feed that is coming in it, and that is not the issue in the U.S. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't know why it seems to be the one that everybody attacks.
Great. Did you say you had a question next? Okay.
Hi. Thanks for having us. This question is basically not about seafood per se, but this particular product that grows in the sea called sea moss. Are you guys familiar with it, and do you have any information as to how good it is and how to use it? Thank you.
I'm going to hand it to Jim.
Yeah, I run into sea moss usually in the Jamaican shakes, and it's a great it's a great drink. It's very sustainable, and there's actually a brewery history using sea moss as a clarifier in breweries. So certainly the majority of that is going to be a wild harvested product. I think some of that particular macroalga is grown for harvest, but I don't think you have any concerns whatsoever about sustainability. And as an autotroph, you don't have concerns about bioamplification, etc. So good choice.
Big fan of algae. Big fan. There's a lot of sorry, microphone man. I'm just used to talking really loud. So big fan of algae. There are also a lot of native species in Florida that you can harvest as a private citizen without any SALs and stuff like that. Look into your local and state regulations. Make sure the areas you're harvesting from are safe, and that there's nothing in the water. And make sure you're cleaning them just like any other food product before you eat. But big fan of algae. Yeah.
And that's a perfect opportunity for me to plug if you want to see algae being grown for aquaculture. That is a stop on our campus tour. So we take you out and we show you the tanks where we're growing them here. So I'll mention more about our programs after, but our next question is right here.
Hello. For wastewater from aquaculture and that sort of thing, what levels of nutrients can they have on them? Are they like zero nutrient output, or are they like slightly elevated for natural levels, or?
Yep, that's a me question. Okay. The short answer to that is it depends. So it depends where they're releasing. So if they're releasing into, like, they can't release into straight concrete, it has to be something that if there are nutrients in the water will absorb it. So that's why the considerations like wetlands and floodplains are taken into account, because we don't want them directly releasing nutrients into water sources. There must be something in the middle that helps pull those nutrients out of the water. We do the best we can to make sure anything that's being released from the farm is minimalized. There's tons of different ways to do that I won't go through here today. But all that to say, it depends on the farm, and those regulations are in play to make sure that the effect on the environment is minimalized. Yeah.
Great. Do we have any other questions? We have about 10 more minutes. I got a couple in the front row here. All right, I'll start on this side and you'll be next, okay?
This is more directly for Dr. Masterson. You had a figure that talked about how at some point that there was more aquaculture fish raised than caught on the sales side. Did that include marine and freshwater? Was that including like bait fish, or was it just in the seafood market?
So repeat the question and describe the figure.
It's figure 71 that you had on your slide. It was a progression of showing the amount of fish that was harvested via catch versus aquaculture raised. So I was wondering, was that just purely in the seafood market, or was that including all aquaculture?
It was stacked, and you saw inland and oceanic catch on there. So that was a cumulative figure.
Okay. That just made it a little more clarification.
And there also was a line showing the total harvest versus the harvest for human consumption. And there's more that's harvested that doesn't go to human consumption. Those are the quote-unquote trash fish, and those would be the herrings and the anchovies that get rendered for fish meal and fish oil. So there's still an impact when we're harvesting that, and that can be at 25% or more of what the annual harvest is. So that was shown in the figure, but that's not for direct consumption.
I was saying, I think it's just you were flying so fast, it's kind of hard for you to process everything on the graph at once.
Sure.
I think you had the last slide, or you were talking about people who are hobbyists, or how about home gardening fish? Do you have any program that would at some point would give pointers to people or show them the possibility of this type of culture?
Yeah, that's something we're currently working on, because the resources that are out there, especially from UF-IFAS, they do the best they can for farmers, but they can be incredibly technical and be for that huge commercial scale. And if you're just someone that's wanting to get into it small scale, doing something in your backyard, reading through those intensive publications can be really challenging. So that's something we're working on, not necessarily to dumb it down, but to make it simpler for people who aren't necessarily researchers or marine scientists, in order to raise just enough, for their families at their home. We're currently working on it. We've got a few productions, a few small scale 300-gallon production aquaponics systems that I've got build guides for. Those we mostly use in schools. As of right now, we don't have any funding or anything like that for opportunities, but yeah, if you reach out to me, I could just send you the IKEA build guide and the entire parts list of what you need to buy to put together a 300-gallon aquaponics system. The cost range runs about probably $1,000 to maybe $2,000. I would suggest reaching out to me before going to buy a prefab kit online, because I could probably help you make it cheaper and way more efficient than the prefabs that you're going to buy. I hope that answers your question.
The backyard farmer, totally for home use. Does that person still need the $100 aquaculture certificate?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. I appreciate that. That is a great question. So if you are not selling product, you are not required to be a certified aquaculture facility. So if it's just for your personal use, you're not required. That being said, there are also restrictions on species that you can grow. Tilapia is one of those. So there are certain species of tilapia that are okay in certain ranges. We've got all of that figured out. If you call us and say, I want to raise blue Nile tilapia, we're going to ask some questions, and you may have to have that certification in order to raise it at your house. That is just an environmental concern, and it allows us to make sure that these aren't going to get into the wild populations in your area. Wonderful question. Thank you. Oh, I will also add to that, if you are a K through 12 organization and you get an aquaculture certificate or registration for your aquaculture program, it is free for K through 12 entities.
Oh, yes, you have a question? Great.
I kind of have an off-the-wall question about sargassum weed that's washed up on all our beaches everywhere. Is there any economical use for that? Have they thought about doing economical things with it?
Fertilizer would be the only use for it. It could potentially be used for a biomass to energy thing. Katrina had an image where algal culture, some of that is going to biofuel. I don't know that there would ever be a cost-effective way to make that happen. But sargassum is not consumable by humans, so it would be fodder. It would be fertilizer, or maybe it could be digested for a biofuel.
Can you put it into your food garden, or does it have certain things in it that are not good?
It would have a high salt content to it, so it might elevate the salinity of your soil above a threshold that your plants would like. But again, it's an autotroph, so it's not hasn't accumulated large amounts of toxins. I would just be mindful of the salt content.
Okay, another question just before I give the microphone back. Why is big eye tuna not good to eat or on the bad list?
Yeah, Tally, do you want to take this one? Or do you want me to take it?
When you say big eye tuna not being good to eat, do you mean in terms of health or in terms of sustainability?
Well, it was on the red list.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I have the recommendations for Seafood Watch up. So you can find good options for big eye tuna. That's going to be hand lines and pull in line that's coming out of the Western and Central Pacific Ocean. So that is, if you want to eat big eye tuna, that's a green best choice option. There is a lot of red and good alternative. And typically when a tuna is listed as red, it's because they're using drifting long lines or purse seines. So purse seines can have the potential for high levels of bycatch, especially for marine mammals like dolphins, and drifting longlines have high levels of bycatch for a lot of shark species, especially endangered shark species. So that would be like my very short reason. But each recommendation has its own reasoning for why it might have received an avoid rating, and you can see the individual recommendations on Seafood Watch if you're interested. You can click on all of them; they're connected to the recs.
And then I'll just speak on the methylmercury content of big eye tuna. The figure that I showed that, in a very confusing way, I will say, used the same rating words that Seafood Watch uses, which was avoid, best choice, like alternative choice. That was created by the FDA and the EPA, so not Seafood Watch, even though they are using the same terms. And that was created specifically for women who may become pregnant, are pregnant, or are nursing, or for children under the age, I think, of 8. So that was just a guide for looking at different fish species that have more or less methylmercury content. If you are not in one of those groups, some sources do say that you can eat those higher mercury containing fish in moderation. For example, I love swordfish. I'm sure if you've had swordfish, you probably love swordfish as well. It's just something that might not be the smartest option to eat every day or every week, but in moderation and by talking with your dietitian, I'm sure that you can figure out how to include big eye tuna that's sustainable and also not push the boundaries of methylmercury content in your diet.
All right, great. Well, it is pretty much 12 o'clock on the dot. We did it. We stayed so on time. We got through so much information. Excellent, excellent work. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone who attended today for being here. I hope you really enjoyed. We're excited about this new series and even more excited about what's to come in our future workshops each month. I want to thank our speakers. Join me in a round of applause for them again one more time. Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise, for Tally for zooming in, for Katrina from driving all the way here. And then I also want to acknowledge our team here at FAU Harbor Branch, Laura, Jim, and then Joey and Jill in the back who helped organize this. Really, really great work. Awesome.
Katrina mentioned Atlantic Sapphire, and Laura had a picture of the Blue House Atlantic Sapphire product. That's the salmon. They do get it at Publix. It's usually a small amount that comes in every couple of weeks, but you can special order it. We are going to have participation from somebody from Atlantic Sapphire in March. And so if you're interested in hearing what we all hope is a bright future for salmon farming around the world and for Florida aquaculture, please plan on joining us in March.
Yes, and that's a good segue into, so our next session, March, is Saturday, March 9th. It will be from 9 a.m. to noon, just like today. The focus of that session is all on finfish, and that'll be a really great schedule. We'll be sending that out to you by email a little bit before, and then we'll also be sending you the recording from today's session. And again, we'll be recording all of these and sending them to you after so you can reference them. If for some reason you miss one, you can go back and watch it. Your registration is good for the remainder of the series through May. So if you want to learn more about the work that we do here at FAU Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute, I encourage you all to stop by our Ocean Discovery Visitor Center. It's the small blue building right on the west side of the main entrance guard gate that you came in. We have exhibits that highlight all of the work that we're doing here. We have an aquaculture exhibit. You can see some of the different plants and animals that we're culturing. We actually just installed a Florida pompano exhibit that we will be putting pompano in this Friday. So you'll be able to see them for the next workshop, but we have some red drums, some sea vegetables, even algae there. I mentioned earlier that we do campus tours. It's not just for students, it's for anyone interested in our history and the research we do. We take you around our 144-acre campus in a trolley and show you our fleet of submersibles. We drive through the aquaculture park, really educational. So if you'd like more information about that, you can find out at the Visitor Center. And we also just recently launched boat tours. So if you're interested in learning about the lagoon and the research that we're doing, we may have room on the one at 1 o'clock today. So please do ask questions, take flyers, and participate in our other programs. We would love to have you. I have flyers out on all the tables in the hallways in the gallery. So as you're on your way out, please grab one. And so with that, the gallery is about to get a little bit hectic with our boat tour returning and folks arriving for the next boat tour, which will be departing. So we ask that you just make your way out and just keep that in mind. And if you have further questions, you can go over to our visitor center and we'd be happy to answer them there. So with that, thank you all again. I think this was a huge success and we can't wait to see you next month.
Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Thank you.